A New Home, Old Version, by AbyssEater. He did it again. He sacrificed himself in order to save his comrades, except this time it was his own choice. Now Naruto finds himself in a new world with all kinds of crazy stuff happening and somehow ending up with a family of his own. Despite that though, when his past catches up to him, it was only a matter of time before things would start to spiral out of control. I don't own anything, adios.
Naruto hummed as he was currently sitting on the couch in the living room. His fingers tapping in tune with him as he glanced at the clock hanging on the wall as Tsunade was coming over any minute now. The past couple days had been nice. Just him, Yasaka and Kuno and no one else. It was something they really needed as they hadn't really had any alone time since Kuno was born as the shinobi had arrived in the same time frame. The meeting they had with Amaterasu wasn't anything out of the ordinary either. It was mainly her interest in the new arrivals which he explained were and came the same way he did. After hearing that Amaterasu told them she was going to appoint a few people to investigate if there was a possible way for them to connect the two worlds together so one could travel freely. That had been the serious portion of the meeting, as after that she had practically demanded to see Kuno. She had wasted no time gushing over her after Yasaka allowed her to hold their daughter, even commenting how beautiful she was and the familiarities the small baby shared with Yasaka. Naruto himself agreed with her words. She would probably end up as a mini Yasaka, as they even had the same beautiful amber eyes as her. The only difference was her blonde hair that was a few shades darker due to his own. The sun goddess had stayed for little over an hour before she had to leave as she had her own job to do. Though she did say she would come over more often, which was fine with both of them, while also keeping them updated if they'd find anything about his homeworld. The sound of someone knocking on the door grabbed his attention and he was about to get up but paused as Yasaka spoke up as she entered the room. "I'll take care of it, Naruto-kun. Here, can you hold Kuno? I just fed her, so expect her to sleep soon." Turning his head, he watched as she walked over to him with a small smile on her face as she held Kuno to her breast. She was clad in a simple loose kimono that showed a lot of cleavage. No, seriously, Naruto sometimes wondered if it hurt with how big they were. Not even Tsunade's could compare to the two mountains on her chest. But he wasn't complaining. Oh no, he'd be a fool to do so, as they made for great and soft pillows and provided for a view that would make anyone jealous during the nightly activities they had. Unfortunately though, they hadn't have sex in quite a while, as Yasaka wanted to make sure she was nice and tight for him. He wanted to complain but he couldn't, as he was better than that. He did look forward to taste her flesh though and knew it would be worth it. Carefully he took Kuno from her hands and held her close to his chest while noting she was half asleep already. Yasaka leaned down, giving him another good look at her chest before sharing a kiss with him. It was a quick kiss though she made sure to use tongue to explore his mouth, a soft whine escaping his mouth as she broke away. She smiled softly despite the glare he sent her. She knew he wasn't serious and mainly irritated as they hadn't been intimate. She was too. However, she wanted the best experience for both of them. She silently promised she would make it worth it and rock his world next time. Patting his head much like one would do to a child, she proceeded to move towards the front door where someone was waiting. Naruto sighed softly as he was left alone. Well, not alone. He looked down at Kuno, who seemed more awake than she was a minute ago. He brought Kuno up until she was at his own level before making a bunch of funny, stupid faces at her. Naruto. Yasaka paused as she re-entered the living room and walked in on the current scene playing out in front of her. Next to her, Tsunade stopped, as well as her hazel eyes looked on with amusement. Naruto, who had his eyes closed, froze upon hearing Yasaka's voice. Slowly he opened his eyes only to be met with the dull stare of Kuno, which caused him to choke as he didn't know babies were capable of looking like that. He then slowly turned to Yasaka, taking note of Tsunade, who was clad in a more formal kimono than the usual haori she wore. "Why, Yasaka, this isn't what it looks like, honest," he quickly said before shrinking in his seat from the stare she sent him. Thankfully that stare didn't last long and he sighed in relief as her expression went back to a small smile. He settled Kuno on his chest as the two blondes walked over to him. "Please take a seat, Tsunade-san." She gestured to the seat that was on the opposite of the couch Naruto was sitting. "I'll make us a cup of tea." Naruto was about to speak up, telling her that he could get a clone to do so, but she already walked off before he could do so. Naruto kept his eyes on her behind though as she walked with a light sway of the hips, unable to see the smile on her face as she knew what he was doing. In her seat, Tsunade felt her eye twitch as she watched Naruto blatantly stare as Yasaka walked away, seeing firsthand how much of a pervert he had turned into. She was glad Jiraiya wasn't here, as the man would have fainted on the spot after laying his eyes on Yasaka. Even she had to admit that the woman was incredibly beautiful, far surpassing anyone else she had ever seen. She herself was revered as the most beautiful kunoichi back in their world, but even she couldn't hold a candle to Yasaka. She had everything from a body any hot-blooded male would lust after, with proportions that would make any female self-conscious and jealous. Exotic features such as her eyes and long golden blonde hair that just seemed to shine constantly. She honestly still couldn't quite believe Naruto managed to score her and was definitely going to ask how the two of them got together. She still wasn't quite sure how to feel about the fact that the blonde gaki she knew was a father already. Though, looking at him now and seeing firsthand how he was looking at his daughter, Kuno, like she was the most precious thing in the world, she couldn't help but feel happy for him. It seemed like a family is what he truly wanted, someone to care for and likewise take care of. She only hoped that when she would meet his mother in the afterlife she wouldn't kill her, as no doubt she would have thrown a fit the moment she would have heard of that. Footsteps were heard and she turned to see Yasaka walking in the room carrying a small tray with 3 cups of hot, steaming tea. She placed 1 cup in front of her, to which Tsunade thanked her before placing the other 2 for herself and Naruto. Yasaka made herself comfortable as she sat down on the couch before cuddling into Naruto, resting her head on his shoulder as the two shared a quick kiss before looking at Tsunade. "So, Naruto-kun told me you wanted to speak with us, Tsunade-san?" "Ah, that's correct, Yasaka Dono." She made sure to use the correct suffix one of her position deserved. While she and Naruto were a couple, she wasn't quite sure if she would appreciate being addressed by her name only. Yasaka waved her hand with a soft giggle. "Just Yasaka is fine, Tsunade-san. Seeing how you're important to Naruto-kun, I'll allow it." The ex-Hokage nodded. "I see, then please call me by my name as well. No need for san." "Alright Tsunade, what is it that you want to talk about?" It was Naruto who spoke this time. Tsunade felt her fingers twitch, still not used at being addressed by her first name by Naruto. "Well, I honestly wanted to know a little bit more about the woman that managed to ensnare the gaki, I mean Naruto." She corrected herself as she couldn't keep calling him that, giving him the same respect he gave her by using his first name. "Well," Naruto shared a look with Yasaka, who nodded her head. "It started pretty much from the moment I woke up in the hospital. The nurse came in, most likely to check up on me, but was surprised I was already awake and healed. At least that's what I assume. Before I could ask anything, the woman was gone, which was quite a surprise." He chuckled a bit as Tsunade listened on. "Luckily for me though, Yasaka-chan came in barely a minute. First thing I did when I saw her was compliment her on her beauty, which she thankfully took no offense to. There was something akin to a spark the moment our eyes met. While I wouldn't call it love on first sight, there definitely was something, and I knew I wasn't the only one." He looked at Yasaka, who nodded and took over. "I asked what he was, as he had chakras circulating inside of him which can only be accessed by yokai. Though I admit I already had somewhat of an idea, despite how ridiculous it might have sounded with how and where he was found. We talked for a bit more, exchanging names before I left, and sent someone to bring him some clothes and someone else to direct him to my office to discuss certain things. Once in my office where we could talk without anyone listening, and Naruto-kun revealed that he was from a different world altogether, confirming my suspicions. I then told him about the supernatural world, as being in Kyoto, which is where most of the yokai reside. It wouldn't do any good to not inform him of that. By the time the two of us were done, it was getting dark, and I offered him a guest room in what was back then my home. He accepted it, despite his earlier protest." Yasaka sent him a playful glare, causing him to scratch his cheek. It wasn't his fault, he didn't like to freeload off of people. Naruto spoke up once more. 2 months, that's how long I had been staying here as a guest of Yasaka-chan. Of course I made sure to help out as much as possible, as I am many things but a freeloader I am not. I would deliver certain papers to important people, the papers not being too important themselves, as people had come to know me for a bit. Though their knowledge was mostly that I stayed with Yasaka, and they must have thought I was good if she allowed me to stay. During those 2 months we would spend a lot of time together. Eating together, watching movies, and just being helpful to me. It was due to all of that I began to develop feelings for her, though back then I wasn't quite sure what exactly it was that I felt other than liking being near her. Though that is mainly due to the lack of parents or any parental figure to know which emotions were which. A flash of sadness crossed his face, but it was gone just as quickly as it came. Yasaka and Tsunade too had a sad expression, though both for different reasons. Yasaka, for being reminded what kind of childhood he had and what he had endured, while Tsunade silently cursed her sensei for how he had handled Naruto. So one afternoon I decided to just go for it and asked Yasaka out. I'm pretty sure I've never been more nervous than I was back then while waiting for her answer, but to my relief she said yes. He said with a smile as he adjusted Kuno so the little girl was more comfortable in his arms. Tsunade looked at Yasaka for confirmation as the blonde nodded. She had been pleasantly surprised when he decided to ask her out. She had actually been wondering how long he would wait with asking her, especially after teasing him with pecks on the cheek every now and then. While it was risky, the fact that he was a kitsune yokai like her made her willing to take the chance, as there weren't any other men she had shown any interest in regardless of their interest in her, or rather her body and possible power. She didn't care for the age difference between them. Yokai, much like the 3 main factions, had a long life, so even if you were a decade or 2 younger than her it wouldn't matter, and she certainly didn't look like it. The night went very well. He blushed a bit as he remembered his rather bold actions. He honestly didn't quite know what caused him to be so direct, but was glad as it paid off. After that we went on more dates. We also began sleeping together. Not in a sexual way or anything, just to be in the other's presence. All until the night came where I turned into a man. Yasaka blushed at being remembered at her own actions that night. though she didn't regret it for it was oh so pleasurable. I see. I'm glad you found someone to love Naruto. I can see that you truly care for another and just wanted to make sure, Tsunade told him with a smile towards Yasaka, thanking the woman to give Naruto what he always wanted. Love, acceptance, she gave him that in spades and he needed that. Though, am I wrong to assume she wasn't planned? Tsunade pointed to Kuno who was asleep on his chest. The two nodded. Correct, I wasn't even aware myself that I was pregnant as fertility rates among yokai are very low, so even with how many times Naruto-kun and I did it, ending up pregnant didn't really cross my mind. I don't mind it though, and upon receiving the news Naruto-kun was very happy, she said with a smile as she rubbed his hand with her thumb. Wait, you're a yokai? Tsunade asked and Yasaka realized what she said. Before she could say anything Naruto silenced her with a kiss before whispering that it was alright. We were going to tell her anyway, remember? Nodding, Yasaka moved to stand up before the air around her shimmered and Tsunade's eyes flew wide open as 9 long golden tails appeared behind Yasaka along with a pair of fox ears on top of her head. Yo you're a Kyuubi, Tsunade breathed out as she slowly overcame her shock. Looking at Naruto, she saw him looking at Yasaka with a warm smile as one of her tails moved to caress his cheek before moving down to do the same to Kuno. Correct, I'm Yasaka, Kyuubi Yukai, leader of Kyoto and the mother of Naruto-kun's child. She fully introduced herself with a small pulse of power coming from her enough to make Tsunade's breath hitch as it hit her. The pulse of power disappeared as quick as it appeared before Yasaka hit her tails and ears and sat back down. You should have expected that, Naruto's voice reached her. How else do you think I or Yasaka were aware of the supernatural? The first time I laid my eyes on her she had her tails and ears out to sea, but I only found her more beautiful like that. His compliments earning his a kiss on the cheek. But, I read in a book about the supernatural that yokai have much longer lifespan. How are you going to handle that? Naruto clicked his tongue, hoping she wouldn't bring this up or at least not currently. Yasaka sent him a look wondering what he was going to reply with. Making eye contact with her he sent her a wink only she noticed as Naruto prepared to conjure up some bullshit. Easy. You see, she's mated to me and such as her mate my lifespan has extended greatly. Unfortunately this is only something Kitsune yokai are capable of as they are very rare amongst the several races and finding a mate is a one-time only type of thing. He finished explaining her his quickly put together lie. I see, Tsunade nodded her head as she seemed to buy what he just said much to his silent relief. Does that mean your daughter, Kuno was it, will have tails and ears as well? Naruto nodded. Yep, it'll take a bit before they appear though. A month at minimum and 3 max. He turned to Yasaka who nodded. So there you have it. Thankfully there are techniques to hide her features once they appear to keep humans unaware. Something every yokai knows or else living amongst humans would be impossible. Tsunade hummed before glancing to a clock hanging on the wall. One more question before I'm finished. When you said they had to attend school were you serious or joking? Here Naruto smirked. I'm dead serious, Tsunade. They aren't 18 nor do either of them have any sort of diploma. They will have to go to school. But what about yourself? She countered. You aren't 18 either even if you look like it. Well, neither of them are currently sleeping with the leader of Kyoto's yokai faction are they? It had benefits aside from sleeping in the same bed with a woman like Yasaka. The deadpanned look sent his way made him almost burst out laughing. The only thing stopping him from doing so was the sleeping from of Kuno. With a shake of her head Suoing the same and Naruto following though much more careful than the other two. Walking up to the two Tsunade and Yasaka shared somewhat of a hug before she moved over to Naruto. She still couldn't believe that with a single year he was gone he managed to end up as a father. She was surprised as well on just how good he seemed to handle his new responsibilities almost like it came natural. She allowed herself to smile as she watched him gently rub Kuno's cheek with his finger. Naruto, can I? Tsunade hesitantly spoke up. He looked down at her to see what she was asking and gave a nod. She walked a bit closer towards him as he held the sleeping form of Kuno out a bit making it easier for her to get a proper look at her. Much like he had done not even a minute ago, Tsunade carefully traced a finger over the newborn's cheek. They all watched, Yasaka included, as she shuffled slightly in her sleep before she pulled back with a smile. Thank you, Tsunade said softly while looking at the two. She felt elated as she got a good look of the beautiful baby Naruto and Yasaka had created. Anyway, it's time for me to leave. It has been nice talking to you and I'm glad that Naruto is in good hands. She bowed to Yasaka who smiled in return. It was nice meeting you as well Tsunade. Naruto-kun had been a pleasant addition to my life, I can't see myself without him. Her words caused a warmth to fill him which he let know by releasing purified Kyuubi chakra as its warmth washed over everyone in the room. Kuno seemed to unconsciously snuggle deeper into him while Yasaka closed her eyes for a moment and basked in it. Let us show you out, she said as she slowly opened her eyes. They walked her to the front door before Yasaka opened it and let her leave. She paused however as Naruto spoke up. Ah Tsunade, the woman looked at him. Tell Kakashi to come around 7 as we'll be able to receive him. He received a nod from her along with a wave that was returned before she continued her walk. He and Yasaka watched her leave for a bit before moving back inside. She seemed nice, Yasaka commented as the two walked back to the living room. Naruto hummed. Yeah, she's alright. I'm still a bit on the edge with the others including Kakashi, so I'm not sure how the meeting we'll have with him later will pass by. A clone popped up in existence next to him, having mastered the technique to the point it was done without any hand signs or smoke. He handed Kuno over before mentally giving it the command to bring her to her crib before dispelling himself. The clone took her before walking off, leaving Naruto to sigh. A pair of arms wrapped around him from behind as Yasaka pressed herself against him. He could feel her breast squished between both himself and her even with both their clothes still on. He turned around in her grasp and Yasaka, not being too much shorter than he was, cupped his cheeks with her hands before standing on her tippy toes while pulling him closer and kissing him soundly on the lips. His hands warmed idly as he kissed back with fervor, their tongues dueling with another before he lifted her up, his hands holding onto her backside as Yasaka locked her ankles behind him. Yeah, Yasaka, he growled out her name in between kisses. A pleasant shudder ran through her body as he called her name. The amount of lust she could sense coming from his words doing nothing but excite her. Disengaging from the kiss, panting with a slight flush, she leaned up till she was next to his ear, her arms wrapped around his neck. Naru. Be bedroom, now, she whimpered out between slight stutters as he began laying kisses on her neck. He paused as her words reached him, leaning back before looking her in the eye to see if she was serious or not. She was. A smile broke through as he claimed her lips once more before making use of a shunshin to directly appear in their bedroom. Yasaka let herself onto the ground before pushing him towards the bed. The back of his legs coming in contact with the furniture made him fall onto it, though he quickly propped himself up by using his elbows just in time to catch her undoing her kimono. His eyes were glued to her form as she slowly undid her kimono, starting with her shoulders, which made her large breast pop out and end up supported by one of her arms. She licked her lips in both a seductive and suggestive manner, her amber orbs twinkling as she could clearly see the effect she was having on him as she noticed the bulge he sported. Twirling around once, she locked eyes with him before with a wink she removed her hand from beneath her breast, simultaneously causing the kimono to drop as well. Yasaka couldn't help but feel excited as she rubbed her thighs together from the hungry look in his eyes as he stared at her naked from. She didn't bother wearing any panties or a bra, the latter due to her nipples being very sensitive and needing to feed Kuno quite often, while the former was that she just didn't feel like it, especially not in her own house. Raising a hand to her mouth, she bit her finger while motioning for him to rid himself of his clothes with her other hand. Naruto wasted no time doing what she asked and quickly rid himself of his clothing and threw them off to the side, his eyes never leaving her form. With a sway in her steps, she slowly moved towards the bed as Naruto scooted back a bit and got on with her knees. Soft laughter escaped her lips as she could see the anticipation in his blue eyes before crawling over to him, her breast swaying from side to side with every movement she made until she straddles his waist. The couple shared a moan as his length rubbed against her lower lips as they again met at a kiss filled with lust and passion. Saliva was exchanged as their hands roamed the other's body unrestricted, his hands moving up and down her back before coming to rest on her meaty cheeks, which he gave a nice, firm squeeze. Her own hands moved up and down his chest, getting a good feel of his muscles he had earned from working out. It was Naruto who broke their lip lock in favor for burying his face in her chest, his lips kisses and nipping at her breast as Yasaka rolled her neck while running her fingers through his blonde hair and keeping his head against her chest. Her breath hitched as he flicked one of her nipples with his tongue, his eyes rolling up to meet her lust-filled ones before going back to the job at hand. He circled her breast with his mouth while making sure to tease her sensitive buds with his tongue before beginning to groan as Yasaka began to grind herself against his member. He removed himself from her breast upon feeling her grinding her wet SX against him and let out a hiss as he increased the grip he had on her behind before getting himself on control. It actually took a bit of effort to stop himself from releasing right then and there. He was saved, however, as Yasaka paused before reaching down between them and wrapping her fingers around his length. His member, now partially coated in her juice, made it easier for her to stroke him firmly, and she relished in the groans he released before feeling that he had a long enough break and pushed his head towards her other breast that had been left out. Finally, Yasaka had enough and used one hand to push him onto his back while she kept stroking his length. Naruto wanted to fight it at first, but as he understood she wanted to get to the main event, he allowed himself to fall onto his back, his head coming to rest on a pillow, making it more comfortable for him. Raising herself a bit, she gave him one last stroke before positioning him right at her wet, dripping SX, and with one last sensual lick of her lips, her lower lips parted as she allowed him entry. Yasaka's thighs quivered as she felt the familiar sensation of being stretched out oh so pleasantly as she dug her fingers in his chest. She felt Naruto massage her thighs as she continued to lower herself on him, her moans increasing in pitch every second he was stretching her out. Finally, after what seemed like forever rest on his pelvic area, a shuddering breath escaped her slightly parted lips as he was completely inside of her. She felt her own walls cling tightly around him, molding around his length to fit him and him only. Meanwhile, Naruto was enjoying the sensations his lower area was experiencing. Finally, after so long, not really, but still, he was back inside of her. And now, as he watched her lightly panting and sweaty form, he couldn't help but admit that the wait was indeed worth it as much as he disliked it. His hands hadn't stopped running up and down her thighs even as Yasaka began grinding back and forth. "Ah, Yasaka," he whispered out her name as she gave a little bounce. Her eyes met his and he could practically feel the lust coming off of her with just a simple glance. Instead of replying with words, Yasaka took a hold of one of his hands and placed it on her breast before placing her own back on his chest. Satisfied with how he was groping her breast, she then began to bounce, slowly, first as to savor every small movement she made before gradually increasing the pace, which did wonderful things to her body as she moaned and writhed on top of him. All Naruto could do while this was happening was lay there and take it. And take it he did, as he just enjoyed their current act of intimacy, letting Yasaka set the pace while he would thrust back a bit each time she came down. How many men would kill to be in his place, to see the expression of pleasure Yasaka sported? He didn't know nor care, as the view he was currently presented with was for his eyes only, and he would make sure of that. With that said, Naruto had enough of being on the bottom. While he usually didn't really care, he wanted more, and so with a tug of his hand he pulled her flush against his chest. Her panting and sweat-covered body contacting his, though he paid it no mind as he rolled them over so he was on top. Her previous look of surprise was replaced by a sinful one as she surrendered herself over to him. Not giving her time to recover, he began to set a pace that would make her beg for more, and he would comply. He only hoped they'd be done by the time Kakashi would arrive. It was little after noon, and a large group consisting of the Konoha shinobi bar Tsunade and Kakashi, Sasuke and Hinata were present as well, so were the trio from Suna. They were currently having lunch as a grill Choji had picked out, as he was the only one of them who had taken time to look for what sort of restaurants there were near the hotel they were staying. Each of them were clothed in different outfits to fit in more with the population, as Gaara, Kankuro and Sasuke's outfits stood out too much. Even Lee had changed from his green jumpsuit into something casual, much to the shock of the rest. Naruto had been kind enough to give each of them a weekly stipend until they would figure out what to do next, which they were to use to buy themselves clothes and pay for food. So, Ino began as she took another bite of a piece of yakitori. "What do you all think of Naruto? I mean, we haven't seen him in over a year, and all of a sudden he's a father, for God's sake." She threw her hands up at the end as she raised her voice. Hinata's pale eyes darkened at being reminded of what had happened back in the hospital, something Sasuke took notice of. "Fuck that!" Kiba exclaimed as he slammed his fist on the table, startling a few of them. "Did you see that literal babe he was with? I want to know how Naruto of all people managed to score her. Hell, even Sasuke was checking her out, and he's as actual as they come." If Kiba was hoping for a reaction out of him, he was wrong, as Sasuke replied with his trademark, HN. Though inwardly he was wondering the same, as he had used his Sharingan to memorize the blonde woman his rival had managed to knock up. Hinata's fingers twitched in agitation as she listened to Kiba's rambling, her mind replying the scene in the hospital and how close her Naruto-kun was with that skank. She had stolen him from her. They were meant to be, destined. Even all the training she had done, each improvement she made, was all thrown aside due to that blonde bitch. He was so different as well. He was her pillar of strength. Countless of hours she had spent training, mastering her clan's techniques, but for what? By now Sasuke was glancing at her from the corner of his eyes. He was probably the only one seeing how she was acting now, which reminded him of his younger self. He had quite an idea what it caused, as slight changes began when Ino mentioned Naruto being a father, and only increasing with Kiba's comment. He only hoped she wouldn't do anything foolish. Back when he first laid his eyes on her, he was briefly able to sense her power and was floored with just how overwhelming it was. There was no chance in hell Hinata would survive an encounter if they were to fight, but her unhealthy obsession with Naruto might force it to come to that. His musings were put to a stop as he, along with the others, looked outside. Just Naruto passed by, with walking next to him a tall, seeing how he was even taller than Naruto, black-haired, muscular young man. While the two seemed to be in a conversation, they all watched as Naruto seemed to laugh over something that was said before pointing his hand to the building they were in. Walking behind the two, they saw the blonde they recognized as Yasaka, who was carrying her daughter in her arms, with another blonde young woman walking next to her who seemed to be focused on the baby she was holding. The sound of the door opening was heard, and they all turned their heads around as they could hear Naruto's voice. "Ha ha ha, really? If you were anyone else I'd find that hard to believe, you know? Don't worry about that. I have a reservation here so we can go and walk on through. You alright, Yasaka-chan?" "I'm fine, Naruto-kun." They watched as Naruto and his small group walked past their booth, though he did spare them a glance before dismissing them like they weren't even there, as he pointed to an empty booth that was at the other side from where they were currently all seated. Naruto and the dark-haired young man both let the blondes sit down first before sitting down themselves, before watching as Yasaka leaned into Naruto. Hinata averted her gaze, as watching them any longer might bring out her psychopathic tendencies, while Choji had to restrain Ino, who wanted to walk over there, both because of Naruto ignoring them and because she wouldn't mind getting to know who that hunk was sitting opposite of him. Sakura looked solemnly at them, seeing the company Naruto was with and how happy he seemed. A quick glance to Sasuke showed her he seemed interested as well, even if he tried to hide it. A waitress showed up with a tray holding a bottle of sake and 4 small cups who walked to their table and greeted them, using the respective san and sama suffixes behind each name. By channeling chakra to their ears, they managed to catch the names of the other blonde and black-haired male, which were Kusha and Siroorg, before she served them the cups and sake bottle while telling them their food would be served shortly. A few of them glanced down at their own drinks, which consisted of soda, as they weren't old enough to be allowed any sort of alcohol. This world, the values of old enough to kill, old enough to drink, and such didn't hold up. They then saw Naruto slip something out of his pocket and put it underneath the table, and just like that they were no longer able to hear a word that was being said. Another quick glance from him showed that he knew they were trying to listen in on them and put an end to that. Scorch marks littered the area while wisps of blue flames were licking away at small patches of grass that remained. Molten rock was clearly visible as well, still sizzling with heat as it came in contact with a thin stream of water that ran through the area. In the middle of all of this, Naruto could be seen, shirtless while panting lightly as he held onto his arm with one hand while clenching his fingers into a fist with the other. Almost, he muttered to himself as he looked at his hand and the light burn marks that had already began healing. He was in his Uchiha form. His 5 tails swaying gently behind him as he hadn't been able to stretch his extra appendages in a while, and this was as good of a time as ever. Shaking his head, Naruto rolled his shoulders before he jumped up high in the air. Once there, his hands went through a set of hand seals the fox inside of him had shown him, and ending with a horse seal. He took a deep breath, his chest expanding with his head thrown back before releasing the build-up air in the form of a concentrated thin beam of blue flames beneath him. The flames were expelled with enough force to keep him in the air, and he looked on as the previously thin stream of flames rapidly expanded into a literal tsunami the instant it came in contact with the ground, and expanding in every direction by dozens of meters instantly. Still in the air, he rotated his body so he was now parallel to the ground and held out his hand in front of his, palm facing downwards. Rasengan spiraled into existence within a second, and carefully he began adding wind chakra to the spiraling sphere he was holding. The effect was immediate as the winds in the area picked up by a considerable amount, further fueling the flames back on the ground. The temperature in the surrounding area had risen greatly since he had caused the tsunami of flames below him, and with the next jutsu he was ready to finish it. The Rasengan in his hand began to brighten slightly as a sign of him successfully infusing wind with it. Hand still aimed downwards at the blazing inferno, and with a sudden burst of wind-natured chakra his wind-infused Rasengan shot forward. Naruto had just enough time to pull off a replacement technique, which turned out to be a smart move as his Rasengan reached the ground in an instant, and the resulting explosion was absolutely enormous. From his spot, safe and several hundred feet away, Naruto watched the result of his 2 techniques, pleased at the over 200 feet high cloud of dust and dirt that was shot up in the air. However, his expression quickly shifted into one of horror as he knew Yasaka was going to reprimand him for that. Especially since even from this distance the ground shook like he was right next to it. That, plus the cloud of dust that one would no doubt able to see from Kyoto, he knew he was in for trouble. Releasing a soft sigh, Naruto turned around and began treading back, dragging his feet along every step, taking as much time as he needed, for he doubted the punishment he was going to receive was worth of hurrying up. Then, he paused as realization struck. Yasaka no doubt had seen or felt what just happened and knew that it was him that was responsible for it. And what if she knew he would take his time returning home? Naruto shuddered as he let his imagination run wild, and those weren't pleasant one bit. So with that in mind, faster than he himself though, he bolted back home and hoped for the best. It took him less than a minute to arrive at their shared home. It would have been less, but the rather busy and narrow streets didn't allow him to move anywhere near his top speed. He couldn't use the roofs either as they weren't built for that. He silently opened the door and made his way inside, locking the door behind him before. He slowly made his way through their home, carefully not to make a sound while silently praying that Yasaka wasn't home at the moment. Perhaps visiting a friend or something. His fears, however, were proven real when he entered the living room and froze mid-step as there, sitting on the couch with Kuno in her arms, she was. Her eyes locked onto his form the moment he stepped inside. He gulped but didn't say a thing, merely being silent while looking anywhere but her. "Hello, Naruto-kun." Yasaka eventually greeted him. On reflex his eyes briefly met hers, only to shudder from the overly sweet smile she sported, one so fake even a blind man could tell. Hello Yasaka-chan." He shakily returned the greeting and she hummed. "I heard you've been busy," she said surprisingly casually, and he winced at what she was implying. Would it help if I said I'm sorry?" Naruto asked as he managed to make eye contact with her while crossing his fingers. Yasaka breathed out softly and shook her head lightly. "Naruto, sit down." She patted the empty space next to her on the couch. He gulped but nonetheless complied with her request and walked over to her before sitting down softly. A moment of silence reigned between them, which was eventually broken as Kuno woke up. Knowing what she wanted, Yasaka, who was currently clothed in her Miko outfit, parted her top, freeing her breast, which attracted his attention as his eyes locked with the pair of globes that bounced slightly. A smirk graced Yasaka's features as she knew where he was looking before she brought Kuno to one of her breasts and popped a nipple in her mouth, silencing her as she fed. "You know," Naruto began, "is it weird if I were to say that I'm quite jealous at the moment?" The deadpan stare he was rewarded with pretty much answered that. "You're not off the hook yet, Naruto-kun. You remember what I told you a while ago, correct? Yet, I felt the tremors even from here, not to mention that just looking outside gave away your position." She sighed as she shook her head. "Naruto, Naruto, Naruto, what am I going to do with you?" She turned her head to face him only to see him staring at his feet. Her gaze softened considerably at that as she knew that he knew he screwed up. If anyone else, such as those shinobi, would see him like that, they would have thought they were in an illusion, as Naruto didn't even put up a fight, compared to his old self who would have argued even for the smallest things. But they didn't know Yasaka like he did, as surrendering was the best option, especially when he himself knew he was at fault. And the worst is that you didn't even bother putting up a barrier in the least. "Hold on." Naruto snapped his head up and looked at her with a single eyebrow raised. "Barrier?" Yasaka blinked, her mouth opening and closing several times before she exhaled deeply and closed her eyes. "I never told you how to create barriers, did I?" she said, more so to herself than him. She paused briefly and averted her gaze down at Kuno, who had stopped suckling from her breast and covered them up, much to his silent displeasure. "I guess the blame lays partly with me then, as well as I should have shown you how to put up a barrier. Especially with how simple it really is. But I digress, though don't expect to get away with it scot-free, you hear me? As by then you will know how to place barriers around to keep any damage inside." She got a nod from him and a loving smile formed on her pretty face. "Good. Now, how about I make us some lunch? I can only assume you're hungry." His eyes lit up and he nodded once more. With a giggle she leaned over to him and shared a quick kiss before handing him their daughter, who was still awake as the child's curious amber eyes met blue ones of him. He brought her up to face level and started to shower her with kisses, stopping as Kuno's chubby hands clasped his cheeks, which prompting him to stick his tongue out playfully. Yasaka, who was now standing up, giggled in the sleeve of her haori before with a light shake of her head made her way to the kitchen to prepare some food for both of them. From the corner of his eyes he saw Yasaka leave and he took the opportunity to turn his body before letting him sit now laying on the couch with Kuno on his chest. Her small hands holding onto his dark blue haori he wore while she stared curiously at him. It was cute. The sight of her small hands attempting to reach up at him. He reached up and gently rubbed the top of her head with two of his fingers, idly wondering when her ears and tails were going to appear. His musings were put to a halt as the scent of freshly cooked noodles dipped in broth reached his nose. Quicker than one might have expected he sat back up, though he made sure Kuno was safe while doing so. Just in time, as well as Yasaka chose that moment to enter the room he was in, her hands carrying a wooden tray that had two bowls on top of it which were filled with steaming hot ramen made by Yasaka herself. She placed the tray down on the low table in front of him and removed both bowls from it. Gracefully Yasaka then moved into a seiza position before gesturing for him to join her, which he did, after creating a clone to bring Kuno to her room and play with her to tire her out so she would go to sleep. The clone did what he commanded it to do and he then joined Yasaka as he moved into a seiza position as well. Thankfully Yasaka had cushions he could use which made it more comfortable. "Itadakimasu," they both said before they dug in. A door was opened as Naruto stepped out, naked with the exception of the towel that he had around his waist. Just a single step out of the changing room and immediately the hot steam of the onsen came in contact, which was quite a contrast with the somewhat chilly air. In Naruto, what are you doing here, you baka? This is the girl's side." He turned his head as he heard someone screeching at him and his eyebrow quirked upwards as he Sakura, Hinata and Tenten huddled together in a corner while using an arm to cover up their chest despite having lowered themselves to chin deep. He also took note of Hinata, who seemed to be confused whether she should be covering herself up more or unashamedly look at him like he was a piece of meat. "Oh, didn't you know that it's co-ed at the onsen today? As for why I'm here," he gestured to the hot water in front of him. "I think that speaks for itself, no?" He proceeded to ignore them as he made his way towards the hot water. He tested the water with his feet, nodding his head in satisfaction upon feeling it clash with his skin. Slowly he then lowered himself into the onsen, undoing the towel just as it was about to come in contact with the water. A long, blissful sigh escaped his lips as the hot water did wonders to his body and muscles. He ducked his head underwater before coming back up and throwing his head back as water dripped from his now wet hair. With a light shake of his head he calmly made his way over to a portion of the onsen he knew he was able to sit down and did so. He hung his head down and closed his eyes as he just enjoyed the calming sensation. He tuned them out as the quartet began talking again after a moment, most likely to see if he was going to peek at them or not. Hey, how ridiculous. They weren't even worth paying attention to really. He literally saw Yasaka naked every day when they would go to bed together and neither of those four came even close to her beauty. Hell, he doubted anyone could match the gentle aura surrounding her combined with a body woman would kill for. And it was all for him. Looking at it like that made Naruto appreciate just how lucky he was for ending up here and meeting her at the right time. And now they had Kuno, their daughter, who was the proof of their relationship. Who would have thought that it'd be him, Uzumaki Naruto, who everyone thought was a dense, loud-mouthed boy with childish ideals, to enter a relationship first? Haha, that's a good one, Choji. Still though, Naruto? The loud, boisterous voice of Kiba was heard. Hinata, Tenten and Sakura are here as well. Shut up, dog breath, and watch those eyes of yours. Naruto let out a groan at Ino's loud voice before opening a single eye and saw Kiba standing there along with the other guys, with only Gaara not being present. Even Sasuke was there, though he did his best to look disinterested as he tightened the towel around his waist, with Sakura in the same vicinity as he was. He chuckled softly to himself as Sasuke took note of him and made his way over to him, stopping a few feet away before entering the onsen and making sure his privates were covered as he came to a stop a couple feet away from him. The others got in as well. He took note of Kiba and Kankuro flexing their muscles in an attempt to impress either of the girls while gradually making their way towards where he was at, much like Sasuke had done. He silently cursed as his relaxation was probably going to be put to an end, as they were most likely going to bombard him with questions. So Naruto, and there it was. Yes, he peered open a single blue eye and looked at Kiba, who was the one that spoke. You never how you and what's her name? Yasaka. Naruto filled in with a dry tone that got him to nod. Yes, her. You never told us how you two ended up, you are. Well, you and she is, like, a total babe. In the water next to Kiba, a slapping sound was heard as Shikamaru smacked himself in the face and groaned. Surprisingly, Sasuke gave a light shake of his head, though Naruto could tell he was interested as well. Naruto looked around and he could see they were all quite interested. Even the girls, and moved a bit closer, all while acting inconspicuous, which didn't work at all. Honestly, I have explained how we got together to both Kakashi and Tsunade, and it's somewhat of a long story, so I'll make it short. If you want the full version, you can ask either of them, as I'm not in the mood. Short version is that she helped me out when I first arrived here, information, a place to stay and such. We both got along surprisingly well, especially since I appeared out of nowhere. So, time passes and I began to develop something for her, which at the time I wasn't sure what it was. And how could I not? She was so kind and had a gentle aura around her. Combine that with a body that would put any kunoichi to shame, I eventually asked her out. He saw them look at him in surprise upon hearing it was him that made the first move and proceeded to correct him. Though that was only after she had began to show an interest in me, as like I said, I wasn't quite sure what these feelings I felt at the time actual meant. Konoha had been less than gracious when it came to that, but whatever. After that we went on more dates and, well, I assume you can guess what happened next, as certain events had to happen for Kuno to be born. He chuckled as he saw some of them looking jealous towards him and or grumbling curses, which only made him laugh louder. I forgot. None of you have actually felt a woman's touch, or a man's. He looked at the four girls who were huddled together a bit away from them. Unless, he turned his head to the side where Sasuke was sitting, not bothered by the glares sent his way. Seeing the gaze the blonde sent him, Sasuke felt something akin to annoyance filling him. The smug smile he wore didn't help either. What? His smile widened. I asked if you're still an uke. The response he got was a glare accompanied by his trademark grunt before looking the other way. Unable to hold it in any longer, Naruto threw his head back and laughed loudly, earning some confused looks as they didn't understand what he had said. Anyo Naruto-kun. He stopped laughing as a meek voice reached his ears. Turning his head, his eyes landed on Hinata, who quickly blushed and tried to hide herself as she lowered herself in the water, so only her head remained. Yes, he said as polite as he could. He didn't really like the girl, not after what had happened in the hospital and in front of Yasaka of all people. Before that he was just indifferent about her and her weird crush she had on him. How could she love him if they never have conversation? He didn't like the look in her eyes when she would watch Yasaka. Do you really love Yasaka? She asked with slight stutter, and he narrowed his eyes as he could hear the venom in her voice when she spoke Yasaka's name. Neji on the other hand closed his eyes and shook his head in exasperation. Hinata-sama, when will you accept that Naruto has changed? Everyone can see how happy he is with her and you only have yourself to blame. Of course I do, he replied without a moment's hesitation and a warm smile. If you know her like I do, it's practically impossible not to fall in love with a woman like her. And when you're as charming as I am, it's hard not to have those feelings returned, you know. Oh really, Naruto-kun? A soft, mellifluous voice was heard, and he along with everyone else snapped their heads to the source, and his eyes widened a bit at seeing Yasaka there naked with only a towel covering her. Her long blonde hair was still in its usual long and loose ponytail while her amber eyes were looking at him. Looking around, Naruto growled as he saw everyone looking her up and down suggestively. Even the girls were looking at her, though that was more out of jealousy than lust, as even with a towel covering the important parts her large breast still threatened to spill out. Still holding eye contact with her, he sent her a wink before releasing a large amount of killing intent, shocking them and causing all of their heads to swivel in his direction. Yasaka took that opportunity, removed the tower before lowering into the water while sending him a warm smile. He took note of that but settled for a glare. I would appreciate it if you would not look at Yasaka, the mother of my daughter, like she's some piece of meat. Seeing that they got the message, he lessened his glare and the killing intent he previously radiated was gone. Damn it, both Kiba and Kankuro said at the same time as they quickly turned around only to see she was submerged to her head. Thankfully the water was muddled, which stopped anyone's attempts of peeking by looking at her from underwater. Naruto's fingers twitched in agitation as he heard those two. Looking to his left where Sasuke was, he splashed him with water as he saw him staring at Yasaka with his Sharingan active. Yasaka from where she was saw what he was doing and laughed softly to herself. A smirk slowly crept on her face along with mischief that sparkled in her eyes as she began making her way towards them. At first they thought she was heading for the other girls, and Ino silenced Hinata's protest by placing her hand on her mouth. She was curious about this woman that managed to conquer Naruto's heart, which back then she was sure was still for Sakura. Likewise, she also wished to know more about what it was about Naruto that had attracted her to him. The blonde was incredibly beautiful. Ino wondered if she was even human, as someone like her would have no problem finding a partner. Yasaka's smirk only widened as she saw the surprised looks on the four girls as she made her way past them and instead seemed to make her way towards Naruto. She kept her distance, traversed through the water past Kiba and Lee as she took note of their lingering gazes. Naruto sat up straight as Yasaka made her way towards him. He held his hands out as an invite, which she accepted as she proceeded to straddle him. He wrapped his arms around her thin waist and pressed her against him, her generous bust smashed in between them as she laid her head on his shoulder. Damn, Kiba voiced, which got nods and agreements from the others as they watched the two and couldn't help but wanting to be in his position. Hinata was forcefully held back by Sakura and Ino as they saw the girl was ready to explode, which wouldn't be good for them as it was both Naruto and Yasaka that made it, so they were able to stay here without issues. Yasaka, who's watching Kuno? He asked the vixen on his lap with a slight stutter as she nipped at his neck. Kuno, I have Maya watching her, Naruto-kun. She volunteered so I could join you here. She responded softly as she felt him run his hands through her long and soft blonde hair. Naruto hummed as he continued his actions, zooming out everyone aside from Yasaka. I see, I take it you put her to sleep beforehand? His answer was a nod from his beloved as he ran his hands up her back. Leaning his head a bit closer, he whispered something in her ears, to which she responded with a nod as she leaned back a bit, using one arm to cover her bust as she lifted herself up a bit and turned around so she was facing the others that were in the onsen. The others looked on curiously as Yasaka lowered herself so she was now sitting in between his legs as Naruto brought his hands to her shoulders before giving her a massage. Yasaka's half-lidded gaze as Naruto worked over her shoulders made for quite the alluring sight. That, combined with the soft moans escaping her slightly parted lips and flushed cheeks, caused some of the guys to uncomfortably squirm around. This went on for a few minutes until he stopped as Yasaka's head was lolled back and he wrapped his arms back around her waist as he held her close. He kissed the side of her head as one of his hands rubbed circles on her stomach beneath the water. Naruto, he paused what he was doing and looked at Sasuke, Yasaka doing the same thing as well as he was the cause for interruption. Seeing his attention was on him, he continued, "One of these days I want to fight you." His request made Naruto raise an eyebrow as the others looked at him as well. "Why?" was the simple answer Naruto gave him. "Why?" Sasuke repeated like it was some sort of outrageous answer. "Because, why not? You're the only here that can give me a challenge." He sent a glance at Yasaka that neither he or she missed. "I can tell you're much stronger as well, and I want to see if my training has paid off. I already defeated both Orochimaru and my brother, and I want to see how I stack up against you now." Naruto didn't reply immediately. Instead he looked at Yasaka, leaned a bit closer and whispered something in his ear. He looked at her and saw her nod, so with a shrug he looked back at Sasuke and said, "Sure, I guess we could spar sometime. It has to be when I'm not busy though, as I also have to take care of Kuno. I also need to make sure not to rough you up too much as you still have school." He finished with a snicker which wasn't returned. The others were less than pleased as well, and one made it verbally known. "Yes, what is this crap actually about, Naruto? I mean really, school? We were done with that once we were 12 and now we have to return?" Kankuro was silent. He was older than the rest bar Yasaka, so school didn't apply to him or his sister Tamari. "I don't see the problem," he calmly replied. "It's only a single year and then you're done. Everyone goes to school, even other supernatural beings do. I'd say it's better than letting a bunch of 12-year-olds head out with a chance they won't return, alive that is." He unintentionally raised his voice. "It's why I'm happy to be here, so when Kuno grows up she won't have to risk her life, in the name of the village, or some crap like that. Brainwashing, that is what it is. Telling children to die for nothing. They should be enjoying their childhood, not worrying every day could be their last," he finished as he made air quotes while a scowl was on his face. Sakura, who was the person to let known how distasteful she found his decision to send them back to school, backed off at the glare as Naruto's chakra came to the surface. Yasaka calmed his down as she rubbed his cheek with her thumb, placing kisses on his face as his chakra receded back in him. He blinked before frowning as he realized he had temporarily lost control of his emotions but said nothing, enjoying Yasaka's touch. "Oh, I almost forgot," Yasaka suddenly exclaimed, which caused Naruto to look at her while she looked back. "I received a letter from the devils who want Kyoto. I'm not completely sure what it's about, but from what I managed to read it has to do with business they want to open here. I sent a letter back that I would be fine meeting them, though whether or not anything will happen is not known." Naruto listened to her and frowned as she explained why they wanted a meeting and didn't like it one bit. To him the devils had enough territory, which was evidenced by them having an entire dimension to themselves. Kyoto should be just for Yukai without any outside influences, be they devil, fallen or otherwise. "I see, will I be attending that meeting as well?" he asked after he finished his thoughts. She nodded. "Yes, it's a good opportunity to gain more experience, and I would be lying if I'd say your presence wouldn't offer me comfort. Aside from that, it's a good time to meet 2 of the 4 Satans, as they will be the ones visiting." "Alright, I don't mind and agree that it would be good for me to meet important people from other factions. The only devils I like are Cyroarg and his peerage, as they are all surprisingly humble. I also want to spar with him again, as we weren't able to finish last time." He absent-mindedly rubbed his side. "He hits like a truck, and I wonder if others around our age are as strong." Yasaka sent him a smile as she proceeded to run her fingers through his damp hair as his hands rested on her behind. They stayed like that for a while, not sure how long exactly, as slowly one by one others left the onsen till they were the only ones left. "Let's get out of here as well, Naru," Yasaka mumbled as her face was resting in the crook of his neck. "I never exactly told Maya how long we'd be gone for." She felt him give a nod as he began moving towards where their towels lay, him carrying her as her limbs were wrapped around him. He let her stand on her own at the changing rooms, the two sharing a kiss before entering their respective room. They met outside a minute or two later, both looking over the other before sharing a smile. They intertwined their fingers before they made their way home, Yasaka resting her head on his shoulder as they walked together like a couple. Soft laughter could be heard from inside of Yasaka's office. There inside, both Yasaka and Naruto could be seen, with the former holding a sleeping Kuno in her arms. "Really, Naruto-kun?" the blonde vixen said as she looked behind her where Naruto was standing. "Yep," the look on his face was priceless, he said as he, with the help from Yasaka, partly undid the haori she wore, so she was now naked from the chest up. Feeling his hands on each side of her shoulder, she closed her eyes as she knew what he was trying to do. "Ooh, thank you, Naruto-kun." Yasaka breathed out softly as she felt him getting to work on the aching muscles in her shoulders. Naruto hummed a soft tune as he massaged her shoulders. He had been doing this for the past couple of days, taking a few minutes out of his day to loosen up her muscles and showing he cared for her. Usually he would do it before they would go to sleep to give her a good night's sleep. Other times, like now, he would to calm her mind, as they had an appointment with 2 of the Satans in a bit today. Leaning his head down, he pressed his lips against the back of her ears, each twitching faintly at the contact as he increased the pressure he was using to massage her shoulders. Leaning back up, he slightly adjusted the golden crown she had on her head. Giving her one more kiss, this time to her temple, he straightened himself before continuing like nothing had happened. A soft smile played on her lips at the affectionate gesture before a soft "ah" escaped her slightly parted lips as she felt his fingers dig into her skin in a pleasurable manner. After a few minutes, Naruto removed his hands from her shoulders and instead began running his fingers through her long blonde hair. His fingers lightly scratching her scalp, which in turn made her let out soft purrs as she moved her head to indicate where she wanted him to scratch. A knocking sound on the door leading to her office was heard. With a soft sigh, Yasaka slowly peered open her eyes, her amber orbs locked onto the door. "Come in." The door opened and in walked a young woman. "Yasaka-sama, Naruto-sama." She greeted the 2 of them with a bow before she took note of how the 2 of them were positioned and blinked. "Ah, Yasaka-sama," she yelped as she averted her gaze. Yasaka laughed softly at her reaction before she leaned forward a bit and with the help of Naruto redid her haori to cover herself up. "I'm fine now, Misaki. Now what brings you here?" Slowly the young woman turned her head, peeking at her leader, and sighed softly in relief upon noticing she was indeed decent. Clearing her throat, she straightened herself. "Ah yes, I'm here to inform you that Lucifer Dono and Leviathan Dono have arrived and are waiting." "I see," she mumbled as Naruto moved from behind her to next to her. "Bring them in, please." Misaki gave another bow before she left. "Hi, Yasaka-sama," and the door closed behind her. Yasaka turned her head to face Naruto. A look of understanding appeared in the latter's face. "Sure, Yasaka-chan, I can hold her." She smiled at him as she stood up and carefully handed over the sleeping form of Kuno, which Naruto accepted without issue. Once that was done, the air behind her shimmered as her 9 long, golden foxtails made themselves visible. She hummed pleasantly at freeing her tails, which swayed behind her a bit before she sat back down. Next to her, Naruto did the same as she had another chair for him in her office. Shortly thereafter, the door opened once more and Naruto got a good look at the 2 people that entered. The first person that got his attention was a young-looking male somewhere in his 20s, Naruto assumed. He had shoulder-length crimson hair and a mix of blue-greenish eyes and a rather easygoing smile present on his face. Next was the person who entered after him, which was a young woman who looked somewhere between 18 and 20. She had black hair that was tied in twin tails and blue eyes, and like the male she too wore a smile. Yasaka Dono. They greeted her as they walked up to the 2 chairs that had been prepared for them. Searsex Dono, Serafal Dono. Yasaka stood up and returned the greeting while Naruto took note that she was a head taller than Serafal. They shook hands before the man. Searsex gestured towards him. And who might this be? He inquired as both he and Serafal looked him over, their eyes lingering a moment on the bundle he was holding close to him. This is Uzumaki Naruto, he'll be accompanying me during our meeting. I see. They held their hands out, which Naruto managed to shake, and the little one he's holding, I assume she's his? He asked as he took note that the blonde looked quite young, especially for a father, but he could be older, his age could be altered by supernatural beings. Correct, Searsex Dono. It was Naruto that answered, speaking up for the first time. And what about the mother? Serafal asked this time as she wanted to walk over and get a good look at the baby he held. They were surprised as instead of replying verbally, one of Yasaka's tails snaked over to him and wrapped around one of his arms. Both Satans widened their eyes at that piece of info, having heard rumors of the gentle fox Yukai of Kyoto being taken, though they didn't know if it was true and if so by whom. So the rumors about you having a daughter are true. Searsex mused as he took note of how comfortable the two were in each other's presence. He wondered what the result of this information spreading out will be. Various people, including devils and those from other factions, had shown a clear interest in courting her, though they had no luck. The blonde woman in front of him had looks, power and an aura of kindness that made it hard not to be attracted to. Even he had to admit that if he weren't married he would have been interested as well. His father, Zeoticus too, had attempted to court her to bring into his harem, though she too had denied him. He hadn't been too pleased upon hearing that, but there wasn't much he could do about it, as attempting to use force would bring down the entire Shinto faction and possible even some others that wanted her for themselves. Naruto-kun and I had her not too long ago, she confirmed with a nod and a smile before she motioned for them to sit. Let's get to it, shall we? I honestly want to spend more time with my daughter and mate. She used a term Yukai used for unmarried couples, and they nodded as they understood. His own wife, Graphia, had given birth to his son not too long ago, so he knew she wanted to spend as much time as she could with her own daughter. Yes, I agree. Searsex spoke before looking at Serafal, who understood what he wanted to. She placed her hands on Yasaka's desk as a small magic circle appeared, out of which a folder appeared. She looked it over quickly to make sure everything was correct before handing it over to Yasaka, who accepted it. From where he was sitting, Naruto kept to himself as Yasaka looked through the folder she had been given, and not wanting to disturb her. Instead he diverted his attention to Kuno, who had woken up the moment she had been handed over to him, though he was happy she didn't cry. He adjusted her in his grasp, using one arm to support Kuno as he used his free hand to play with her. Her amber eyes following his finger as he moved it in front of her face before bobbing her on the nose. Soft giggling escaped Kuno, surprising not only him but Yasaka as well, as she paused what she was doing and looked to her side. Naruto smiled sheepishly as everyone stared at him while Kuno had her small hands wrapped around his finger. Giving a light shake of her head, Yasaka focused back to the folder which she had almost finished. So if I'm reading this correct, you want to open 2 hotels here in Kyoto? She asked as she briefly paused and looked up. That's correct, Yasaka Dono. I see, she said softly before continuing to read. And may I ask why Kyoto? Devils already have an entire dimension to themselves. Natu's the current home of a majority of Yukai, some of which are still not used to living together with humans. Ah, but that is exactly why, Yasaka Dono. We thought it would be good to establish a relationship with the Yukai faction, which are the largest faction after the 3 big ones. And perhaps if this is done we could have peace talks sometime in the future. Here Yasaka frowned at Serafal's words and looked at both devils. Are you saying that I were to deny this there won't be any peace talks? Cause if so I can assure you that I want nothing to do with it in the first place, as it's extortion. Immediately Serafal raised her hands while shaking her head. No, Yasaka Dono, that is not what I'm implying at all. Perhaps I worded it poorly, but I can assure you that is not the case. The glare that was previously on Yasaka's face slowly melted away, though the slightly narrow eyes look she held wasn't missed by anyone. I see. I think I need some time to properly look this over once more and discuss it with someone else. At the same time I'll need to talk with Amaterasu, as she has the last word due to Japan being her territory, and ultimately her word precedes mine, especially with matters such as these. We understand, Searsex said as Serafal nodded her head. Them being devils made sure Amaterasu herself would have to be involved, where if they were just regular humans the decision was on Yasaka. Could we schedule a next meeting then, or is that not doable at the moment? I don't think it is wise to schedule our next meeting already, as I'm unsure of how long this will take. I'll look this over in my spare time, and Amaterasu-sama is quite busy last I heard. I suggest that I will send a letter requesting for a next meeting when that is done, as I can't give a clear date right now. Hearing those words both Satans exchanged looks with another, an unspoken conversation going on between the two before they returned their gaze back towards Yasaka. "That is acceptable, Yasaka Dono. Now, is there anything you wish to ask us or else we are done here?" The answer came in the form of her shaking her head. "No, that's all, Sears Dono. I will try to reply as soon as possible but make no promises." As she said that, Kuno took the opportunity to let everyone know she was still awake as she began making baby noises. One of her small hands was holding onto the fabric of his haori while the other one was reaching out towards her mother. "If we are done, I kindly ask you to let yourself out as I have to take care of my daughter as she needs to be fed." She got a nod in return as they stood up, all of them, Naruto included. They shook hands once more, though Naruto was unable to as he had his hands full, so he gave a small bow of his head and watched as instead of leaving using the door, 2 magic circles formed beneath their feet, teleporting them away. Once they were gone, Yasaka walked towards him and took Kuno from his hands while sharing a quick kiss with Naruto before she sat back down and undid her top and freed her breast. She brought their daughter to her lactating nipple, who took it without complaint while Naruto took a seat next to her. He reached over and after seeing Yasaka nod, grabbed the folder the devils had given her and began to read it. Interesting, though at least the hotels they're interested in building have the traditional Japanese style, as having one of these modern hotels in a potential district written on here would not work. He looked over it some more before raising an eyebrow. Really, the Sears X Hotel and Serafal Hotel? Of all the names they wanted to be named after themselves. Those names don't even fit in with any of the surrounding buildings, let alone Kyoto itself. And what is your opinion, Naruto-kun? Should we or should we not let them build hotels here in Kyoto? Honestly, he looked at Yasaka, who was holding Kuno, who was still feeding. I don't think we should. Currently Kyoto is home for the yokai. Yes, humans live here as well, but they can live together without a problem, and if there is, it can be handled quite easy. Now adding devils to this. I don't like it. They're more than often power hungry and their morals are questionable. They are based on the sins after all. Their ability to reincarnate beings, be they yokai, fallen or humans, don't sit well with me either, as I can already see several situations play out in which they will be killed so they can be added to peerages or whatever they're called. Lastly, and this goes back to the first point, the devils, like you said, already have an entire dimension to themselves. I am aware they have hotels and businesses all over the world to increase their influence and cash flow, and I can't see a reason for why Kyoto. Even their reason for yokai being the largest faction after the big three is a bit. He trailed off, but she understood. So my opinion is that Kyoto should be free of any devil influence, especially 2 Satans who might have ulterior motives, and be a safe haven for yokai. I don't hate devils or anything, as I have not met enough of them aside from Cyroorg and his companions who I enjoy spending time with, and now those 2 Satans who I've not yet formed an opinion on. During his time talking, Kuno had stopped feeding while she listened intently to what his opinion on all of this was and inwardly agreed with specific points he brought up. Mainly that Kyoto has been home to yokai for as long as one can remember, with regular humans having been allowed to live here little over half a century ago, and that was met with opposition back then. It was only the knowledge that yokai, whether they be male or female, could easily overpower them caused their worries and fears to lessen. With devils that just wasn't the same. She was the strongest being in Kyoto right now, and she was labeled high ultimate in her devil terms and considered on the level of a dragon king if she were to use the ley lines running beneath Kyoto. Naruto, judging from his current power to tail ratio, would surpass her when he reached his 9th tail. Unless of course the growth curve is different with him than normal, where each tail increases the user's power by a set amount, and the 8th to 9th tail being a 100% increase in power. Yasaka sighed softly as she would have to think over it and what would be good for her people, though she was currently leaning towards Naruto's side. Amaterasu would only have to be informed if she thought it was a good idea, but she was going to do it either way, for she might be interested due to the nature of the deal. Naruto-kun, let's head home, okay? I'm done here for today. He looked at her before nodding with a shrug. Do you need any help? He asked as he saw she still was showing him her chest while Kuno seemed out of it. Yes, please. She told him, and he stood up and like before took Kuno from her hands. The little bundle moved a bit but quickly calmed down as he let some of his soothing chakra wash over her. Yasaka secured her haori before taking the folder in her hand and intertwining the other with his before they walked out of her office. Outside, the couple could be seen walking through the streets together. They had taken a left instead of the usual right in order to head home. It was a slightly longer path, but it led them through the same park where they had shared their first kiss, which was a special moment for both of them. They stopped as they passed a bench, and Yasaka sent him a look which he understood as the two sat down. He made himself comfortable, or as comfortable a wooden bench could be, while she leaned into him, resting her head on his shoulder. You remember? She asked softly as she rubbed Kunu's tummy with her fingers. She turned her head a bit to see the fond smile he wore as he watched their daughter react even in her sleep. I do, he replied after a brief pause. It was right there when we shared our first kiss. He looked a bit up ahead where a small clearing was that wasn't blocked by both sun and moonlight to shine on through depending on the time of the day. Yasaka hummed while a soft smile played on her face as she stared at his face, which was once more focused on Kuno. Eventually though he seemed to be aware of her lingering gaze as he slowly turned and looked at her. He seemed a bit taken back by the look of longing she had but controlled himself as he sent her a smile. "You okay, Yasaka-chan? You seem to be out of it for a bit?" "Yes, I'm fine," she answered immediately before snapping out of her apparent daze. Naruto was about to speak up but wasn't able to, as before he knew it Yasaka had leaned in and pressed her lips against his, putting a stop to whatever he was going to say. He was surprised by the kiss, something that showed from the slight widening of his eyes but soon began to return it with equal vigor. Their kiss lasted for minutes before reluctantly breaking off, leaving both panting while keeping eye contact. He was about to initiate another one but stopped as his eyes narrowed in the direction of thick foliage. "Naruto-kun?" He heard Yasaka call out to him as she looked around to see what caused his reaction. Not finding anything, he smiled sheepishly at her. "Ah, sorry, I thought I saw something from the corner of my eye but it must have been my imagination." He gave her a peck on the lips. "Let's head home. We can continue there and some more if you want." Yasaka quickly nodded as she got up and helped him do the same. Naruto gave the area one more look over before the two continued their walk. Shortly after they left, and once the area seemed empty, a person could be seen walking out of the surrounding bushes. Featureless white eyes were narrowed in anger along with a scowl on the person's face, which turned from the empty bench to the person's right where two small silhouettes could be seen if just barely. Out of nowhere the person lashed out with a palm strike, shooting out a compressed vacuum of air which made contact and subsequently caused the wooden bench to crack. Satisfied, the person walked off in the opposite direction of the previous two. Knock knock. Knock. No, the door was opened, halting any further attempts of knocking by a rather irritated-looking Naruto, evident by the sigh he released upon seeing that the person who knocked was Sakura of all people. "What?" The pinkette swallowed at the expression on his face but managed to keep herself together and smiled. "Hey Naruto. I'm wondering if you could spare some time to hang out with us for a bit?" "Us?" he asked before looking behind her and seeing the rest of those from Konoha and Suna aside from Tsunade and Kakashi, who he assumed had better things to do like himself. Taking a deep breath, he closed his eyes before slowly exhaling while rubbing the bridge of his nose. Fine. I doubt you'd stop bothering me else. Make it quick though, as I rather spend the evening in company of Yasaka and Kuno instead of, well, you." Somewhat taken back by his answer, she almost lashed out, but a single look from Naruto let her know that it wouldn't be a smart idea, making sure she knew he wasn't the same love-struck boy who she could hit and not expect any retaliation. That's fine," she told him with a small nod. HMPH. He then closed the door right in her face, and Sakura wondered to herself if she misunderstood what he told her. She looked behind her to see the rest looking expectantly at her, and she was about to open her mouth before the door opened once more, as this time Naruto stepped outside. "This better not be a waste. You remember what I said, right? Let's go," he said to each of them as he walked past them. He led them to an empty field that wasn't too far away from his home before he stopped, turned around and looked at them expectantly. "So, what is it that you need me to put a pause to time I could spend with my family for?" he asked as his blue eyes trailed over everyone present. It was Kiba who stepped forward and spoke up. "Man, Naruto, we're just worried about you, you know. You've changed so much you're hardly recognizable anymore. You weren't like this before you disappeared. Hell, you're not even spending any time with us, your friends. Instead you're always busy or with that woman of yours." A few others nodded to Kiba's words, agreeing to what he said. "Kiba is right, Naruto." Sakura butt in. "You're acting much colder than the last mission we were on, which was rescuing Gaara. Even now you freely admit to not even willing to spend a few minutes with us." Naruto raised his hand as he had enough. He didn't come out here to listen to their complaints. This is not what he stopped time with his family for, and was going to let them know. "Look, the reason I'm not the same is because I simply am not. I've matured, grown up. I even found someone to love and who loves me back, who I also have a daughter with, and you expect me to be the same loud-mouthed brat who spewed all kinds of crap that was largely ignored by everyone else? I'm telling you right now, that is not how it works, and to expect it does implies you know nothing of the topic you speak about. Neither of you know anything about me, about my life, my struggles, and what I have endured to end up as the person I am today. In fact, during my time here and with Yasaka, I've come to realize that we aren't really friends." That statement clearly shocked many of them, judging from their expressions. "What do you mean we aren't your friends? What else are we?" Shikamaru asked the blonde. He shrugged. "I don't know, but friends we are not. Let's be real here, what do we really know of another? Our first and last names, what else? The other's birthday. Well, I can say right now I have no idea about any of yours. Your likes, dislikes and dreams, aside from Sakura and Sasuke, and I don't even know if those are still the same, I know none of yours. So tell me, what makes us friends, because I don't see it. Cyroorg, who I met a while back, is a better friend than any of you. He didn't attempt to kill me or hits me regularly. Aside from our spars, that is. We know the other's dreams, ambitions, likes and all of that. Isn't that weird? I know more about someone I've known for less than a year than I do any of you. That's not true, Naruto-kun. And he heard enough of that. He sent Hinata a look, stopping her stutter, which was more annoying than anything since it was still the same after all these years. He assumed, especially after what happened in the hospital, something he still hadn't forgiven her for, that she had grown a backbone, but it seems that was not the case. She was still a weird if not annoying girl who unfortunately seemed infatuated with him despite him clearly being anything but taken, which she knows as he doubted she was stupid. Hinata, your stuttering is annoying. I already have a good idea of what you're going to say and don't. Just stop. Your love for me, as weird as it is since I'm probably the least of everyone here, is unrequited, especially after what he did in the hospital in front of Yasaka no less. You should be happy she knew that I wouldn't initiate whatever it is you hoped for, or I doubt you'd even be here. Now that I've got that out of the way, it seems like I've only been called here for you to complain to me, and I don't like listening to you, so I'm telling right now that I'm done. He was about to use a shunshin to leave but paused and turned to Sasuke. You still want that fight? Understanding he was talking to him, Sasuke quickly nodded. Fine, 1 week from now we'll fight. You'll hear more about it later, so feel free to prepare, bye. With that said, his form glowed slightly before he was gone, going to relieve his stress he received with Yasaka's help. It was early in the morning and already Naruto could be seen overlooking papers that were from the Inagami, who wanted to start on a few renovations in their district. It wasn't complicated or anything. The details in the papers were about what and where the renovations were required, along with the estimated cost and time it would take to be completed. While on a first glance everything seemed okay, if one were to look a bit closer they would notice slight details that would caught someone's attention. In this case it were the slight twitches of his left eye and the fingers of his left hand that were digging into the desk were such examples. The reason for this came in the form of a popping sound that resonated from beneath the desk. Naruto let out a shuddering breath as he leaned back into the chair before he gazed down and was rewarded with a view any man would kill for, and he couldn't help but release a groan as her large amber eyes stared right up at him. He could see the raw emotions, love, lust and affection that were directed at him. Though it didn't help that she currently had her lips wrapped tightly around the base of his length while she groped her own breast with one of her hands, which had been freed out of the haori she wore, while her other was massaging his balls. He closed one eye as he tried to regulate his breathing, though her touch, along with her tongue he felt flicking over his head that was in her warm mouth, brought him close to release. He did release, however, when he felt her swallow, making her throat constrict around his length in such a pleasurable manner he gurgled something incoherently, which also let her know had reached his limit. Instead of removing him from her mouth, her eyes fluttered close as she increased the suction, causing Naruto to dig his fingers in the armrest as he felt himself let loose inside of her, a moan escaping his lips as she ran her tongue over his now overly sensitive tip. "D-damn Yasaka-chan. That was amazing," he mumbled to her in a slight daze. Still kneeling between his knees, Yasaka smirked before she pulled him out of her mouth once she knew he was done. She licked her lips as she swallowed down his essence, making sure to put up a show as she stared right at him while doing so. A soft growl escaped Naruto's throat at her teasing before without a warning he pulled her up and into his lap. A slight squeal was heard from Yasaka at the unexpected move, but before he could make fun of her for that she grabbed his head and smashed it between her two large mounds. Any protests Naruto was about to make stopped as his head was surrounded on all sides by her soft, fleshy prison. Oh, a surprised moan escaped Yasaka's mouth as she felt him kiss and nip the valley of her breast. One of her hands came up and she combed her fingers through his soft blonde spikes. After an undisclosed amount of time, Naruto removed himself from between her two mounds before latching onto her neck. He pressed her close to him, feeling her chest squished between the two of them even with his own top still on. He caressed her cheek with one of his hands while the other he scratched the area just above her tails, actually feeling her purring as he kissed and sucked on her neck and throat. Minutes later he broke up, leaning back to see a lightly panting Yasaka whose cheeks were covered in a rosy flush with an unfocused look in her eyes. He brought her conscious back as he began to play with her, kneading them in his hands as slowly milk began to trickle out of them. The blonde vixen blinked a few times before looking down at her chest that was being fondled by his hands. "Naru," she let a soft yet sensual sounding whine that got his attention. "Yes, Yasaka-chan." He cupped her cheeks and gave her a soft kiss which she returned without question before she broke it. "You remember you had that fight with Sasuke, correct?" She leaned her head on his shoulder as she stared at him. He looked at her with confusion. "Yeah, why? Nothing. I just want you to be careful. Try not to show off and instead be serious." I will. Though a shame I can't use my tails, as they would have made it much easier as I could attack him with them as well." Yasaka let out a soft hum as Naruto began poking her breast. "That's true, though you could if you wanted to. You're just limiting yourself." Meh, he shrugged as his eyes were glued to her two bouncy spheres he was playing with. "The amount of chakra I currently have along with the close to perfect control I have over it should ensure my victory unless he pulls out some weird technique with those eyes of his, but even then, the difference in chakra levels should still be massive." If you say so." She then hopped off his lap, making him pout, which was ignored as she winked at him. He watched as she closed her haori with her breast locked away. "Unfortunately, I'm going to check up on Kuno and make us some lunch. I expect you to come home once you're done." She blew him a kiss before she walked out of the room. his eyes following the sway of her hips with every step she took before she left. He sighed as he was left alone in the office as with a grunt grabbed a hold of the papers and got to work. The quicker he finished the better. Walking up to an empty field on the outskirts of Kyoto were Naruto with Yasaka walking next to him while she held Kuno. He had chosen this location as it was far enough from civilization to where even if a barrier that was going to be put up were to break it still wouldn't be noticed as anything other a slight rumble that could easily be ridden off. "I see you're all here." Naruto spoke up as he allowed his deep blue eyes to travel over everyone present. He stopped briefly at Sasuke, looking him up and down once before continuing. The group of shinobi turned around as they heard his voice and saw the two of them walk up. "Oi Naruto, nice clothes," Kakashi commented with a thumbs up. He spared the man a glance before he shook his head and stopped once he stood a feet or 5 away from them. One arm was slung over Yasaka's shoulder and the other resting on his hip. Locking eyes with Sasuke, he raised an eyebrow at the serious expression on his face. It was rather refreshing from the usual glare that he held. "So, I take it you're ready?" Sasuke straightened himself and nodded, one hand resting on his sheathed jakudo hanging on the side of him. "Of course, I've been waited ever since our battle those years ago." "I see," he mumbled with closed eyes before nodding to himself. He held out towards the field, gesturing him to get ready, which he did without any questions asked. "Don't let yourself get hit unnecessarily," he heard Yasaka whisper to him, a shiver running down his spine as her warm breath impacted his skin. "Don't worry," he turned to her and smiled. "After sparring with Cyroork my pain threshold went up by a lot, so I should be fine. Nonetheless, I'll remember that." The two shared a quick kiss and he gave Kuno one as well before he walked off and got ready, rolling back his sleeves a bit as he did so. While he did that, Yasaka turned towards the others and motioned for them to stand back a bit with a kind smile on her face. "Thank you," she said as they did what she requested. The group watched as Yasaka used one hand and held her palm out, which caused a magic circle to briefly appear. Before anyone could get a good look at it, it was gone as a barrier shot up into the sky completely surrounding Naruto and Sasuke while keeping them safe. Inside of the barrier, Naruto took note of Sasuke's Sharingan that was active as he seemed to be interested in the barrier surrounding them. He wasn't in the mood to tell him that it would be of no use as this wasn't something that could be copied without knowing how, as there were no hand seals used. Not to mention that the art itself was different. Clapping his hands, he got his attention and smirked at him. "If you're done looking around, can we start? If you're lucky, we'll finish this, so who?" Naruto chuckled at the scowl on the Sasuke's face at his words before he nodded. Giving a nod of his own, he turned to Yasaka, who understood as Che counted down. "Ready? 3, 2, 1. Fight!" Neither Sasuke or Naruto moved as those words left Yasaka's mouth. Instead, the two engaged in some sort of staring contest. Despite that, however, those on the sidelines could almost taste the tension that was in the air as this was a long-awaited battle for two rivals. Then, Naruto made the first move, but instead of moving from his spot, he only raised his hand up with an open palm, which resulted in some confusion. "What is that back Naruto doing?" Sakura asked no one in particular, catching herself on her slip as last time she called Naruto an idiot. The blonde he was with didn't like that one bit. And now with her standing quite close by, she wasn't going to risk it as Sasuke himself told them that she was powerful, much more than either of them, and that included her own sensei, both of them. "Who do you think is going to win?" Yasaka heard a voice ask from her left. She turned her head to see both Tsunade and Kakashi, who had decided to move next to her instead of hanging with the rest. "Naruto-kun will win, of course," she answered like it should be more than obvious. Kakashi raised his eyebrow as he spared her a look before resuming his focus on what was happening inside. "Ho, that answer seems a bit biased, no?" A shrug of her shoulders is what he got in return. He increased his focus as something seemed to happen. With his enhanced hearing, he caught both Sakura and Yasaka's words and allowed a small smirk to grace his face. The answer to Sakura's question came when the Sasuke standing opposite of him dispersed and rematerialized behind him. His hand that was moving downwards was caught in his firm grip, keeping him from moving even when Naruto felt him try. Not wasting a second longer, he surprised Sasuke as he threw him over his shoulder and sent a kick at his form, which managed to send him flying several meters back. Correcting himself mid-air, he landed softly and immediately flashed through several hand seals he had practiced dozens of times. However, he was surprised as he looked up at Naruto and noticed him copying his hand seals as well, which confused him as he couldn't use fire style, right? Calling his bluff, he finished and raised his fingers to his mouth before spewing out a stream of flames which shaped itself into the head of a dragon and shot forward. "Kaden. Goryuka no Jutsu." The smirk on Naruto's face only widened as he decided to copy his jutsu and surprised not only Sasuke but the other onlookers bar Yasaka, as well as he spewed out a stream of flames much like Sasuke's own, except his were blue in color. Much like Sasuke's own, his flames too shaped itself into the head of a dragon before meeting his in the middle of the field. An explosion was both felt and heard as the two techniques clashed against the other, and when the smoke from the explosion died down, it revealed neither of them had won. However, both he and Yasaka knew he had unpowered that technique as their blue flames were much hotter than regular ones. In fact, their flames were one of the strongest, beaten only by dragons, though much like their own it depended on which dragon and Amaterasu herself. "Naruto," Sasuke said slowly as he stared at the blonde with his Sharingan active. "Yes, Sasuke?" Naruto responded calmly, like he didn't just copy his technique and used it. And what were those flames of his? They were blue, but he didn't know of any way to get them like that. He knew of black flames which were courtesy of Itachi, who had used them against him, and they were clearly stronger as it ate away at his own. But these blue ones Naruto was using did nothing aside from cancelling his own. Deciding to mull over those questions later, he shook his head before focusing on the blonde who stood there all too calmly. He exhaled softly before he disappeared from his spot, Naruto doing the same moments later. They both appeared in the middle of the field, fist meeting fist, and Sasuke couldn't help but grunt a bit from the force behind his punch before he allowed himself to be turned around so he could lash out with a kick. His attempt was met with Naruto's own knee, who then grabbed his leg and tried to kick his other one from beneath him in order to make him fall. He saw through it, however, jumped back as Naruto loosened the grip he had. Once more the two shared a glance, and at some unseen signal they were off. Their form were a blur to all but the faster spectators. Kakashi, Tsunade, Lee, Neji and Gaara all had an easier time keeping up as they were all used to high-speed battles, while the others had a bit more trouble as they would only catch brief glimpses whenever they would pause for less than a second with fist and legs locked before they continued to move. Kakashi sent Yasaka a quick look but noticed she looked on calmly, her amber eyes easily following both of them, which he took note of even as she took a short pause to adjust Kuno in her arms. More and more craters appeared inside of the barrier as Naruto and Sasuke kept clashing against another. However, if one were to look at Naruto, they would see a frown on his face even as he slapped away one of Sasuke's fists that were heading towards his face. "Is this it? I barely feel anything from these hits, unlike Cyroorg, who I have to actively avoid as he hits like a truck." He paused his thoughts before his arm blurred and he grabbed a hold of a surprised Sasuke, who was unable to see the fist heading towards him that made contact with his cheek and sent his head turning to the right. "GHRK," Sasuke grunted with a slight daze as the force behind that hit was a lot more than he expected. Naruto took his chance and lashed out again, this time with a knee that he planted in his opponent's stomach before with a spinning kick he sent him careening off to the side. "Sasuke-kun." Sakura screamed out in shock as Sasuke harshly impacted the barrier and slowly pulled himself up while grunting as he felt a stinging sensation in his ribs. His sudden appearance had surprised most, who weren't able to see the quick exchange they had prior to Naruto launching him away, and looked behind him at the blonde who had landed on the ground. Naruto made a horse sign with his hand before his chakras spiked, catching the attention of everyone present. Sasuke was just able to turn around in order to see the literal tsunami of flames heading his way. His eyes worked overtime as he tried to find a way to counter this, if not escape, while the spectators all had to step back a bit as even they could feel the heat of the massive attack Naruto had unleashed. At the other side of the sea of flames, Naruto waited patiently as he awaited the result of the devastating attack. While he didn't need to use any hand seals for that technique, it would only raise more questions than it already did for his ability to breath out blue flames. As the flames slowly died down, it was Naruto's turn to raise an eyebrow as he gazed upon the chakra construct that surrounded him and was slightly see-through. What is this? The demonic-looking manifestation of chakra lowered its shield it had to cover itself, revealing Sasuke, who was inside of it, and Naruto quickly took note of his eyes that had changed from the regular Sharingan, so he quickly put together that this was some sort of power granted by his eyes. "Susanoo. The Uchiha clan's ultimate defense. I didn't think I would have to use this on you, Naruto, but you managed to surprise me. This is the first time I'm using it against someone, so prepare yourself, Naruto." The Susanoo raised on of its hand with its palm facing outwards, and Naruto watched as a ball of black flames appeared in it before it shot outwards towards him with surprising speed. All his senses screamed for him to dodge, and that is what he did. He quickly jumped to the side as the ball impacted the ground he previously stood on and exploded, which sent flickers of B direction. He frowned as this was going to get much harder now as he needed to get him out of his chakra construct. Trying to buy time, he flared his chakra once more. This time several clones appeared. There was no smoke or the need for hand seals. He had used the technique so much when he was younger it was as easy as breathing. Giving them a mental command, he stepped back as each of the clones formed a Rasengan in their hands, once more surprising the onlookers that there was no need for an extra clone. They charged at once, blurring towards Sasuke, who responded in kind by shooting more clusters of those vile-looking flames which took out his clones in large numbers. A couple managed to survive and slammed their Rasengans against Sasuke's Susanoo, only for it to do nothing but scratch it, which was quickly healed as Sasuke supplied it with more chakra. While that was disheartening, Naruto did notice that Sasuke hadn't moved until now. Why? He didn't know, but he assumed it had something to do with the Susanoo itself. He assumed it was slow, not mobile, which is why he was almost hugging the barrier to make sure he wouldn't be able to reach around the back, which was its weak spot. He held his hand out as he formed a Rasengan once more, but he didn't stop there. With subtle wind manipulation its color began to change to a lighter, almost white as he held his palm out towards Sasuke. Finally, with one last burst of chakra the Rasengan shot forward at speeds that were almost too fast for the naked eye. It was only due to his Sharingan Sasuke managed to raise its shield just in time, though that didn't prepare him for the force that was behind the attack as the seemingly small ball exploded with a force not proportionate for its small size. Sasuke grunted as he found himself being pushed back, as weird as it was. Outside near the spectators, Yasaka had to strengthen the barrier in case Sasuke continued to slide back, but thankfully that wasn't the case as he stopped just as he was about to reach the border. Naruto cursed as it didn't manage to break through and was about to go with something more destructive when he paused and watched the Susanoo surrounding Sasuke slowly began to shrink more and more until it was completely gone. Sasuke fell to one of his knees, panting as keeping the chakra construct up took out a lot of his chakra and he felt his reserves getting close to empty. He clicked his tongue as he looked up and noticed Naruto didn't even look a bit fatigued even after all those chakra-heavy jutsus he had used. He truly envied the blonde's stamina and chakra reserves even if he knew it was the Kyuubi inside of him that gave him that. Though the latter wasn't true anymore as Naruto was slowly assimilating the biju sealed within him. With little difficulty Sasuke managed to stand back up on his two legs before he formed a set of hand seals Naruto was all too familiar with, especially when he held his other hand out and lightning crackled into existence. Understanding what Sasuke wanted, Naruto allowed himself a small smile as he held his own hand out to the side and once more a Rasengan spiraled into existence. Rasengan, Chidori. Both Naruto and Sasuke broke out in a sprint before appearing at each other's throat. Both wearing a smile as their technique fought the other for dominance. Large gusts of wind were picked up, fluttering their hair as neither planned on giving up first. The barrier Yasaka had set up threatened to break, even surprising her as their current attacks didn't look that dangerous compared to the rest, and before she could repair it the barrier broke, making the blonde quickly cover Kuno for any dirt and dust their struggle was causing to pick up. Then, a loud booming noise reached their ears with one final gust of wind. Though this one was noted to be much stronger than any of the previous ones combined. And when it finally died down along with the rest, the scene presented to them was of Naruto and Sasuke standing next to each other and they could see Naruto had his eyes closed. Just as they were about to wonder who had won, all but Yasaka, who already knew, let out a shocked gasp as Sasuke fell to his knees before falling face first to the ground, unconscious. Naruto on the other hand slowly opened his eyes, revealing his deep blue eyes that were surprisingly calm. He spared Sasuke a glance and nodded his head in respect before he made his way to Yasaka, who flashed him a smile. Sakura took that as a sign and she quickly ran towards the unconscious form of Sasuke and scanning him to see if he had any wounds that required him to visit a hospital. Thankfully it appeared he had chakra exhaustion along with a couple cracked ribs that a good night's rest wouldn't heal. Naruto smiled as he reached Yasaka and pulled her into a hug, though he was careful not to hurt Kuno in the process. "See, told you I'd take him." He spoke even as he buried his face in her hair and inhaling deeply. That you did. Though seeing and speaking is quite different, you know," she mumbled as she too took in his scent, unbothered by the light amount of sweat coating him as it instead turned her on more than anything. Yeah, he sheepishly scratched the back of his head before nodding at both Tsunade and Kakashi to let them know he was aware of their presence. "You mind if I?" He trailed off, but Yasaka understood what he wanted and nodded as she allowed him to hold Kuno so she could adjust her haori as her breast threatened to spill out and she wasn't going to give anyone a free show. Except Naruto, of course. "So Naruto, I see you've improved." Kakashi spoke up in an attempt to start up a conversation. The blonde was currently tickling Kuno, who was wide awake and looked at his old sensei and nodded. "Yep, hundreds of clones working constantly on chakra control does that for you." "And what about that Rasengan you used? The one you shot towards Sasuke?" Tsunade asked as she walked up to them and watched how he was handling Kuno. "Oh that," he kissed his daughter on the forehead before moving his gaze to Tsunade. "That was actually quite funny how I discovered that, as I assure you it wasn't what I intended. I tried to add a chakra nature to the Rasengan now that I was able to do it with one hand, but instead of that it resulting in the Rasengan shooting out of my hand. Then with the help of clones it only took me a week before it was perfected, which resulted in what you just saw. Yes, it has surprising amount of power despite its looks. I know, right? First time I did it I managed to shoot it through over a dozen trees before it came to a stop only because it lost its form and exploded. I actually cut me up a bit from that, though it healed quickly." I see. Kakashi nodded before asking something else that had been bothering him. "And what about those blue flames of yours? I didn't even know you knew fire manipulation." Naruto hummed. "Well, that is something I received from my companion." He glanced down at his stomach in hopes they got what he meant. "A couple days after I arrived here I tried to manipulate my chakra. You know, as in trying some techniques. It was surprisingly harder than it should have been, and before I knew it I passed out. I peered in the seal where I had a nice conversation with the biju and apparently something happened that caused me to develop an affinity towards fire. I'm not complaining though, as fire and wind make for a deadly combination. Standing next to him, Yasaka listened on as Naruto came up with a story right on the spot, which was quite impressive, especially when they seemed to believe it, though she did notice the slight narrowing of the other blonde's eyes at some parts of his story but kept silent for now. I see, it was nice seeing how much you've progressed while you've been here. Though if you need some help or anything, let me know, as I know quite a few techniques, both fire and wind. Naruto sent Kakashi a smile. I think I'll take that offer. More techniques can always help, and if not get'll result in less chakra consumption, are more than welcome. Kakashi gave Naruto an eye smile. I'll hold you to that. Great, if we're done here I'd like to return home, as I could use a shower with the dirt and such I got on me. He and Yasaka were ready to leave, but he paused at the last second. Kakashi, would you like to come over for dinner later? Kakashi thought about it for a moment before shrugging. Well, I don't want to be a bother. Naruto waved his hand. Nah, it's fine. Both Yasaka-chan and I wouldn't mind having you over. Next to him, Yasaka gave a small nod. Naruto-kun is correct, Hitaki-san. Just let us know and we'll prepare an extra plate for you. If you say it like that, it would be hard to decline. It wouldn't hurt to spend some time with your daughter either. Alright, we'll be seeing you later then, and tell Sasuke I had fun whenever he wakes up. With that, he and Yasaka waved them goodbye before they turned around and began making their way back home. Kakashi watched their backs before letting out a soft chuckle. You'd be proud of how your son has grown up, sensei. The ground shook, trembled as two blurs could be seen. Those with enhanced eyesight would be able to catch glimpses of the two blondes and would see that the male of the two was clearly on the defensive, narrowly dodging another attack that rumbled the ground and added another crater. My, getting a bit slow there, Yasaka-chan. Naruto taunted the blonde vixen as he dodged her descending fist, and in a blur of movement, quicker than she brought her hand down, he was already on the other side of the field. Turning around, Yasaka looked at him before pouting cutely. Naruto-kun, why are you so mean? Naruto had to restrain himself from lowering his guard at the face she made, as it damn sure was effective. If he didn't know her as good as he did, he might have been fooled, as barely seconds later her expression changed into one of seriousness as her amber eyes peered at him. Then Yasaka moved. She appeared in front of him with such speed it was like she had teleported, and not having expected that, he was unable to defend himself properly. His eyes flew open and so did his mouth as he let out a silent scream. Blood along with spittle left his parted lips as he was hunched over, Yasaka's fist planted deeply in his stomach. GHRK was the sound he made, as the only thing he registered was pain. A lot of it, and he wheezed. Weakly he raised his head and looked at the spot Yasaka previously occupied, only to see another one there, which faded away, revealing it to be an after image. He didn't move, and Yasaka hadn't removed her fist as he forced his internal organs to heal and then strengthened them with a layer of chakra. She seemed to have sensed this as she removed her fist, spun on her heels and lashed out with a kick towards his head. He raised his arms up in a weak attempt to defend himself, which didn't do shit as he felt the bones in his arms break before he was sent flying. Dazed by her kick, he was unable to righten himself and as such ended up crashing into the ground, hard. Even when he hit the ground, his body continued to tumble, and Naruto bit the inside of his cheek to stifle any screams that threatened to escape. Once he came to a stop, he took a few calming breaths as his healing factor began to work. Slowly he turned on his side and watched as Yasaka walked towards him with a smirk on her pretty face. He frowned as she stopped a couple feet away from him and crossed her arms beneath her chest. What was that about me being too slow, Naruto-kun? Who, was the sound that came out of him as he stared at, his eyes pleading for help. Despite having only landed 2 hits, the force behind them was utterly atrocious even for him. Though I have to say I'm impressed you're still conscious, as I put close to my full strength behind those hits. She giggled to herself as he could only weakly glare at her. Having healed enough to the point he could breathe without any sort of pain, and launched himself at her. Kya! Yasaka yelped out in as his sudden move caught her off guard and caused her to fall backwards with him on top. She let out a soft grunt as she impacted the ground and felt the extra weight from him who was laying on top of her. She felt his body shake a bit and was about to be worried when her sensitive ears picked up the muffled sound coming from his throat, which she recognized as him chuckling. Any worried she might have had left her, and she ran her fingers through his soft, spiky locks as she let out a soft giggle as well, his laughter being contagious. She felt him wrap his arms around her waist as he rolled them around, so now she was on top. Her face mere inches away from his as her bright amber eyes looked at his, her long blonde hair acting as a curtain that covered the two. Slowly she brought her head down as they met in a soft yet passionate kiss. MMHM. Yasaka moaned into the kiss as their tongues battled another while her hands continued to comb through his hair. She was beaten, however, as one of his hands came up and cupped her breast, which made her gasp softly, and he took the opportunity to push her tongue back and let his own enter her mouth, where he proceeded to leave nothing untouched. Yasaka quickly submitted herself as she took note of the vigor with which he was moving around in her mouth, occasionally sliding her own tongue against his in soft caresses, which were appreciated. Time passed by and neither of them knew how long they made out for. Naruto had one of his hands inside of Yasaka's battle kimono as his hand traveled over her naked flesh. She mewed softly as they finally broke their kiss, and she rubbed her face against his chest while she began to grind herself against him as a whole. Naruto let out a soft groan before he stopped her, making her look at him confused. He didn't seem to take note of that, however, as his head was turned to the side and his gaze focused on a small group of trees and bushes. "Something wrong?" Yasaka asked as she moved to straddle him. "Come out. I can sense you." He ignored Yasaka, though she too looked at where he was looking. For a moment nothing happened, though Naruto kept his focus on the shrubbery. By now Yasaka had sensed several people as well, and they weren't her guards as she hadn't given them an order to follow her, and even if she did they wouldn't be hidden like this. Naruto opened his mouth to repeat his words, but it was not necessary as finally two familiar faces walked out of the bushes. "Sakura, Sasuke," Naruto said as he propped himself up on an elbow and watched as the two walked out. Both had a blush on their cheeks as they had watched the two sucking on the other's face for longer than they'd be willing to admit. It wasn't their fault, really. Though perhaps they should have looked away once it started, but it was rather interesting to see Naruto get beaten with two well-placed hits and actually stay down. It was proof of Yasaka's strength, as despite the changes he had undergone no one would refute that it was almost impossible to keep Naruto down. His healing factor and stamina made more than sure for that. Even Sakura herself, with training from Tsunade and fists that could shatter rocks with ease, very much doubted she could get him to stay down. That is, if she were to be able to get a hit in, as just from watching she knew keeping up with Naruto was hard to damn near impossible, except for Lee, Sasuke, and she'd assume Kakashi as well. Letting out a soft sigh, Naruto sat up and wrapped his arms around Yasaka's slim waist as he held her close before he looked at them with a rather serious expression. "How long have you two been watching us? Scratch that. Why are you watching us in the first place?" Neither of the two answered, which did nothing except annoy him even more. "I expect an answer to my question. Why were you watching us, or should I say spying?" "We wanted to see how strong she was." Sakura sent Yasaka a glance, refraining herself from scowling as she couldn't help but admire the blonde's beauty and compare it to herself, which made her dissatisfied with the result. Every one of the guys, well except for Kakashi, had leered at her unrefrained, while in private they unashamedly admitted of being quite jealous of Naruto, who was the not only able to see her without clothes but also banging her behind closed door while they were all still virgins. Even Sasuke, the same person who had never shown an actual interest in the opposite sex, had admitted he was entranced by her. Of course he didn't admit it verbally, but the slight coloring of his cheeks along with the diverting of his gaze when Kiba had asked him spoke for itself. It was only the knowledge that the two of them were completely into each other that brought her solace, for they appeared to be made for another. Though she was also happy for Naruto, who had finally found someone he was going to spend the rest of his life with and loved him unconditionally. The two of them already had an adorable daughter together that was proof of their love. Though Hinata seemed to disagree and was stuck on her belief that she admittedly so thought she when she first saw them together, but just by looking at the two interacting with another cleared up any misconceptions about the two. Sakura just hoped Naruto would sit down with Hinata one of these days and make it clear to her that she should stop pursuing him. She had seen firsthand the transformation she underwent from her previously gentle self, and she seemed to be getting even darker every day. She didn't write off the possibility of her trying to attack Yasaka, or even worse, Kuno. The latter, as it would bring down the wrath of Naruto, and she would be lying if she said she wasn't scared to see what it was, while the former was much easier to guess. And from seeing how she was able to take down Naruto with ease, it didn't bode well for the Hyuga. "How strong Yasaka is," Naruto repeated as he looked at his beloved vixen. Sakura nodded. "Yes, Sasuke-kun told me that she was much stronger than she appeared, and I didn't believe him initially, but now," she referred to her incapacitating him with two hard and well-placed hits. "I see," he muttered to himself, though Yasaka clearly heard him as she smirked down at him. He didn't like that smirk of hers and jabbed her in the ribs, making her jerk a bit before she growled at him and without a warning slammed him down, cratering the ground around them. Watching them, both Sakura and Sasuke couldn't help but wince as they felt the ground shake a bit as a result, as Yasaka stared innocently at the two. "Now, is there anything I can help you with, Sakura-san? Sasuke-san?" she asked with a slight tilt of her head while she stroked Naruto's cheek, who was currently out of it completely. Well. Sakura began, only for Sasuke to cut her off. "We're here to ask if Naruto wants to hang out, but it seems he's incapable at the moment." "Nonsense." Yasaka waved her free hand as with the other one she began to pull on his cheek for a couple seconds before he woke up. "Ouch," he yelped as he rubbed his cheek while sending her an accusing glare. "What was that for, Yasaka-chan?" "Huh, what do you mean? I didn't do anything," she replied with a smile while he sent her a look that screamed, "Really?" Naruto scoffed. "Sure, now what is it?" From the top right corner of his eyes he could see Sakura and Sasuke looking at him expectantly, so he assumed it had something to do with them. "They want to hang out with you." Yasaka answered for them, and he saw the two nod. Opening his mouth to give his reply, he stopped as he looked at Yasaka with a raised eyebrow as he felt her cup his groin through his pants. "Naru, you should accept." "Why?" he asked softly, much like her words were. Because, you need more friends aside from Cyroorg. It will be good to catch up with them, I promise. Really? He sounded doubtful. Yes, really. Yasaka nodded before she leaned her head down and whispered to him. If you do this I'll make sure to reward you tonight. The blonde shuddered as she licked his cheek and he narrowed his eyes at her. Fine, though I was planning on giving you a massage actually. Oh, her eyes lit up at the prospect of that. A full body one? Naruto nodded while licking his lips. I'll look forward to it. She leaned back up before placing a finger on his lips. Don't worry, I'll be taking care of Kuno. You spent more than enough time for today, so it's my turn now. He huffed at her with a pout. Fine. Satisfied with his answer she got up before helping him as well, his joints making loud cracking sounds as he stretched. If you keep this up it will be me that has to give you a massage, she quipped and he rolled his eyes. I'll make sure to be home in time for dinner, he said as they shared one more kiss. That's fine. Now, please go and try to enjoy yourself. I'm going to have to send a message to the devils in response to the meeting we had a while ago. Naruto scrunched up his face. I see, later Yasaka-chan. Later dear. Yasaka returned before she formed a magic circle underneath her and teleported herself home. So, Naruto began as he made his way towards the pair with his hands resting on the back of his head as he walked, hanging out By the way, they looked at him and he smirked. Did you like what you saw? Cause I know I did. He laughed at the looks on their faces before Sakura interrupted him with a question. Hey Naruto, who is Cyroorg? He paused as he looked at her with a single eyebrow raised. You don't know? He looked between her and Sasuke. I thought you did. He furrowed his brows together and thought. Ah yes, now I remember. Anyway, Cyroorg is a devil, a pure-blooded one. He's a good friend of mine who often comes here to Kyoto to hang out and spar as he is one of the few I can go all out on and him likewise on me. And how did you meet him? She asked again and Sasuke listened in as well, curious about this person and also what Naruto said about going all out which made him wonder if he didn't during their fight. I met him. I don't know, I'd say a few months after I arrived here. I was eating ramen at one of the stalls when he sat down a bit later and he too ordered some. Somehow then we ended up in an eating contest and we both passed out. We woke up shortly thereafter and we apparently ate the same amount, something I still don't quite believe. Yasaka came by as well and we just talked. He would then come by more regularly and somehow we ended up as rivals and friends. Though I'm pretty sure you have met him or at least seen him as we'd visited that one restaurant one day with me, Yasaka with Kuno, Cyroorg and Kusha. Wait, you mean that tall muscular dude you walked with is him? Sasuke asked. Yep. He nodded. Despite how he looks he's really friendly though and always up for a spar if you ask. Though I advise against it as he doesn't really know the meaning of holding back all that well. HN. Came Sasuke's reply and he rolled his eyes. How typical of Sasuke to let advice go in one ear and out in the other. Guess not everything changed about him. Oh well, perhaps he should introduce them as he knew Sasuke wouldn't be able to stop himself from challenging him and then he'd have first row seat of seeing him being beaten around. As they walked through the streets of Kyoto, Sakura and Sasuke realized just how many people were looking at them or rather Naruto as they smiled and greeted him. They saw him smile too as he returned their greetings and waved when he'd apparently recognized someone. They then paused as something seemed to have caught Naruto's eye and he glanced back at them before nudging his head into a certain direction. Is that Shikamaru and Temari over there or are my eyes deceiving me? Sakura turned her vision in the direction he was looking and after a few seconds she saw what he was talking about and nodded. Never thought those two would end up like this. Especially when thinking back to their interactions at the Chunin exams, he then shrugged. Oh well, hope it works out for them and that Gaara won't end up doing anything too drastic. He breathed softly as he ran a hand through his locks. So, what exactly are the plans or are we just going to wander around for now? Sakura looked at Sasuke for an answer but the boy just shrugged much to her irritation. Thankfully though the answer came in the form of Neji, Lee and Tenten whom they met as they turned left. Although she wondered if this was better or not. Naruto-kun. Lee exclaimed rather loud the moment he laid his eyes on them. In a blur of movement he was in front of him much to the ire of Neji and Tenten who hurried up after him. Naruto looked at Lee blankly as the bull-haired boy raved on about way too many topics for the few sentences he got out. He was saved when Neji catched up and grabbed him by the shoulder as slowly his eyes regained their focus just as Neji gave an apologetic bow. Please excuse Lee's behavior, Naruto-san. It's fine Riang anyway. He said with a closed-eye smile, missing the tears that ran down Lee's face while doing so. What brings you three here? He attempted to start a conversation. It's Lee, Tenten answered and Neji nodded. He's shopping for more outfits and we are here to make sure he doesn't buy anything resembling his old green jumpsuit. Naruto made a noise as he looked at Lee. He thankfully had changed his clothes upon arrival as that truly was an eyesore. The fact that they were in Kyoto assured everyone that there were no chances of finding one like it though there were still plenty of outfits that were kind of weird and knowing Lee that'd be exactly what he'd go for. He was glad they weren't in a bigger place like Tokyo or the surrounding areas or else who knows what would happen. Even when he and Yasaka had walked around back when they had a meeting with Azazel months ago. Seriously, he couldn't look anywhere in Akihabara without being blasted by anything anime related. Although, not that he would admit it out loud, but he had began binge watching some shows that he caught glimpses of. And he had to say that he enjoyed them but made sure Yasaka wasn't present when watching them or she'd probably scold him or something. Say, do you want to grab something to eat? His thoughts came to an end as Tenten asked them a question. He breathed out softly and Sakura quickly answered. Yes, that'd be nice and I'm sure you're quite hungry aren't you, Naruto? Naruto blinked. Why is that? Neji asked as the blonde seemed okay. Sasuke-kun and I had been watching Naruto and Yasaka spar and seeing her handle him to the point of knocking him out. I'm sure he's hungry. Really? Let's go and you can tell us more, Tenten said excitedly as she was most curious about Yasaka and her beating Naruto who managed to beat Sasuke came for a surprise to her. She has always looked up to strong women which is why she had such admiration for Tsunade who was known as the strongest kunoichi and even hoped to one day be able to take that title from her. And to hear that someone managed to not only knock Naruto out who had shown he had become much stronger than most would have expected from him piqued her interest like none other. Tenten didn't let Naruto reply as she grabbed onto the sleeve of his haori and the six entered a small restaurant for lunch. Entering his and Yasaka's shared home he closed the door behind him before he hung his head as it was finally over. He honestly didn't expect it to be so utterly boring. There had been several times he had to restrain himself from just getting up and leaving as they had just been asking him question after question. Tenten especially was quite annoying as she barraged him with questions about Yasaka. She should be asking them to her and not him for God's sake. Shaking his head to calm himself he straightened his back and began making his way deeper inside of his home. Come on Kuno say mama. Ma. Ma. Yasaka said softly while emphasizing both syllables as she booped Kuno on the nose. That was what Naruto walked in on, seeing Yasaka trying to make Kuno say her first word. He stood there for a moment, arms folded over another as he leaned against the doorway as Yasaka tried again and again. It was a heartwarming scene to see and once more reinforced his belief that ending up here was one of the best things to have happened to him by far. Only being beaten by meeting Yasaka and having Kuno and he wouldn't trade either for anything in the world. Soft chuckle escaped him as he watched another failed attempt of Yasaka which resulted in the woman to pout. Yasaka paused what she was doing and turned to him as she heard his chuckles which only increased as he saw her flushed cheeks. Naru-kun, how long were you watching me for? She asked while fighting down her blush. A minute or two perhaps. He answered while sparing a glance towards the clock on the wall. Long enough to have somewhat of an idea what you're trying to do. He pushed himself from his leaning position and walked over her as he sat down next to her. Kuno seemed more interested in him as she followed his movement as he sat down next to Yasaka. Immediately as he sat down she lifted her small hands in an attempt to reach out to him. Giggles escaped Kuno as he took her small hands in his own and he leaned down a bit and gently blew air at her. Da. Yasaka and Naruto paused at the sound that escaped Kuno's lips and exchanged looks. Can you repeat that Kuno-chan? Naruto asked her softly while Yasaka sent him a narrow eyes look that held no hostility or such as she had an idea what he was doing but didn't like it. Da. Kuno repeated again and Naruto nodded as he still kept his smile. Go on Kuno. Say da-da. He cheered her on while Yasaka's pupils were getting thinner and thinner by the moment. As if Kuno knew what Yasaka was feeling she continued. Da. Da. Da-da. Da-da-da-da. Yes. Naruto exclaimed as he took Kuno from Yasaka and held the small infant close as he showered her with kisses. Da-da. Kuno said again as she pinched his cheeks while doing so. He let her do so for a moment before lowering her down to his chest, giving her his fingers which she played with. Turning his head he sweat dropped as he took in the depressive aura surrounding Yasaka who mumbled to herself. How? I tried. So long, she hung her head down in defeat. Frowning, he lifted her up and gave her a kiss to which she responded to after a few seconds. Cheer up Yasaka-chan. You know it was 50-50 chance it just happened I won. I know, she murmured as she leaned her head on his shoulder and gazed at Kuno. I just hoped, you know? She felt him nod and kiss the top of her head, her ears twitching as he brushed against them with his nose. I did but we should be happy she said her first word. You can expect her to say, Mama, soon isn't that right little one? He scratched Kuno's cheek which she seemed to enjoy as her eyes closed while her own fox ears twitched as well. Unless she decided to be a little trickster, a mischievous little kid. He allowed his ears and tails to come into view and moved them around to form a warm bed which he placed Kuno in. Did you have any fun when you were out with those two? Yasaka suddenly asked. Her answer was Naruto letting himself slump back against the couch while groaning audibly. It was so boring Yasaka-chan. They kept asking me question after question and some of them weren't even about me. What do you mean? Yasaka made a cute confused face. Exactly that, one of them was very curious about you and just wouldn't shut up. Though I did affirm my beliefs that I didn't have a good relationship with them to begin with. I don't know if I should be happy or sad from that realization. he said softly as he thought back to his earlier life in Konoha. Back then he considered them all friends, though it was mainly due to not wanting to feel alone. He didn't even care if he knew nothing besides their names. When he was younger he was more than satisfied with just that, as there were finally people he could interact with, people who had to recognize his existence for it was necessary to survive. But now, having experienced a rather peaceful life where he didn't have to fear for his life with the threat of the akatsuki and not being constantly on the move, it just made him realize how fucked up his earlier years were. Combined with the lack of attention and affection he had suffered when he was younger made him cherish the bond he had with Yasaka above all else. Admittedly, he sometimes wondered what his life would be like if nothing like this happened. Would he still be alive? Or would the akatsuki get their hands on him and remove the biju from inside of him? Would he, unlike now, still be alone? Sure, there was Hinata who seemed to like him, but he had no interest in her. She was too much, too weird. Obsessed, even as evident by how she acted around Yasaka whenever she came. He knew he had to talk to her one of these days before it got to the point she would attempt to harm either Yasaka and Kuno, and he wasn't sure what he would do if that happened. That is, if Yasaka didn't take care of it first, of course. And he wasn't stupid to think Hinata would stand a chance were Yasaka to actually try. People here had no tenketsu, so her Byakugan would be useless, and the gentle fist as well. Even if it was capable of damaging internal organs, there was no chance of her hitting Yasaka, who was much faster and much more agile than she looked. Here he glanced at her chest that was hidden by the kimono she wore. Something interesting? The sound of Yasaka's voice brought him out of his previous state of mind, and he looked at her confused. "You were staring at my chest," she simply stated, although she wasn't bothered by it. Better hers than some other woman. "Sorry, I've been mulling over something I need to do before it gets out of hand." "Ah, you mean that pale-eyed girl?" Yasaka asked, and he looked at her. You know," surprisingly, Yasaka scoffed. "How could I not? I have seen how she looks at you and the difference when she looks at me. It was quite clear back then in the hospital. Remember? I have let it slide because she isn't acting on the issues she has." "Yeah, I had the same in my mind. I've been pretty much ignoring it, as like you said, she isn't acting on it. If it comes to it, however, I'll just kick her out of Kyoto if I'm unable to make her stop going after me." He glanced down at Kuno, whose small hands were busy playing with his tails. He felt Yasaka kiss she side on his face and whisper, "Whatever happens, I'm trusting you to do the right thing, dear, both for yourself as well as us." "Hey," he rubbed his head against hers while taking in her scent. "That means a lot, you know, hearing you say that." The soft rumbling of Yasaka's stomach was heard next, and Naruto couldn't help but let out a chuckle. "Shut up," the blonde muttered while blushing, and his chuckles only increased in volume, Kuno's own giggles joining us. Wordlessly a clone appeared, to which he gave the mental command to start dinner for both, which it did with no complaints, thankfully. "Oh, almost forgot." Yasaka spoke up as they had a moment of silence they were enjoying while watching Kuno's antics. "Sairoorg called for you, but you weren't here. He's inviting you over to the underworld as he apparently wants you to meet some important people." "Really? The underworld, huh? Can't say I'm not curious. You think I should accept?" Yasaka hummed. "I think you should, as it would be good for the relation between us, Yukai and him, which is always welcome. Aside from that, you can expect to go there more often, and this is a good opportunity to see it yourself at your own pace. Just be careful not be caught off guard, as there is a chance someone might attempt to turn you using their evil pieces." "Would that even work on me? With the fox I'm currently assimilating, that is?" "It might. The only limits that are known is that one cannot reincarnate someone that is stronger than the king. Though you technically have two souls, so I can't say so at the moment." "Don't worry, I will. I'll call Sairoorg after dinner then to let him know." He used his tails to bring Kuno closer and took her from them. "I'm also going to talk to the fox sometime soon, as I haven't heard from him in a while after he showed me some neat tricks." "Alright, Naru." Yasaka brought her own tails forward, which mingled with his own as they connected their chakra with another in a way only they were capable of. His own warm, calming chakra washing over her, which made her quite sleepy if anything.